My wife's brother moved in with us 3 months ago. Except he wasn't her brother, and he wasn't gay. And everything I thought I knew about the woman I married was a lie she'd been building since before our first date. So here's the short version. My wife convinced me to take in her supposedly disowned brother who was fresh out of rehab. Turns out he was actually her drug addict boyfriend she never broke up with, and she fabricated an entire family backstory, conservative parents, a painful estrangement, all of it just to keep this man close while married to me. I'm 32 male. My wife is Renee, 28, and genuinely one of the sharpest people I've ever met, which makes all of this worse. The man she moved into our home is Marco, 27, and her parents, Gerald and Diane, are the warm, lovely people Renee told me she'd been disowned by. They hadn't disowned anyone. They didn't even know Marco existed. Let me back up to where this started because the lie didn't begin with Marco moving in. It began on our second date. Renee told me about her family over cheap pasta at a place that doesn't exist anymore. She said her parents were deeply conservative, the kind who monitored her phone until she was 20, who refused to let her study out of state, who saw any deviation from their plan as betrayal. She said she'd clawed her way out, moved cities, cut contact, built herself from nothing. I remember sitting across from her thinking, times this woman is extraordinary. Asterisk. She told me her younger brother had come out as gay and her parents had disowned him completely, changed the locks, removed his photos. She said she'd tried to intervene and they'd cut her off too. She cried telling me this. Real tears, or what I believed were real tears. Her voice cracked in the right places. Her hands shook holding her wine glass. I fell in love with her courage before I fell in love with her. We married 14 months later. Her family didn't attend the wedding. I never questioned it. Why would I? The story was airtight. She had a stepbrother named Ryan from Gerald's first marriage, and she'd mentioned him exactly twice in passing enough to establish he existed, never enough for me to dig. I realize now she rationed every detail like someone managing inventory. Then 3 months ago, she told me her brother had finally gone to rehab. She said he'd reached out. She said he had nowhere to go. She asked if we could take him in temporarily, just until he got stable. His name was Marco. I said yes because I loved her, and because I thought I was helping someone she loved. Marco arrived with a duffel bag and the kind of exhaustion that made him look 10 years older than 27. He was polite, quiet, grateful. He called me man a lot. He slept on our pull-out couch and did the dishes without being asked. But things didn't sit right almost immediately. The first thing was the name. Renee's last name before marriage was Bellamy. Her parents were the Bellamys. Marco's last name, which I saw on a piece of mail that arrived for him in our mailbox the second week, was Reyes. I asked Renee about it casually. She said he'd legally changed it after the disownment wanted nothing to do with the family name. I nodded. Filed it away. The second thing was the whispering. They whispered constantly. In the kitchen when I was in the living room. On the balcony when I was showering. Once I came home early and they were sitting on the couch with a gap between them that looked recently manufactured, like two magnets pulled apart by a third hand. Marco stood up too fast. Renee smiled too wide. The third thing was that Marco never talked about the family. Not once. A man supposedly disowned by his parents, freshly sober, living in his sister's apartment, and he never mentioned them. Never said their names. Never expressed anger or grief, or anything at all about the people who'd supposedly destroyed his life. I posted about it online. Anonymous, vague. Just the broad strokes, wife's brother living with us, different surname, weird energy, constant private conversations. The responses split into two camps. Half said I was paranoid. The other half sent me links to threads I wish I'd never read. Wives who'd moved lovers into the family home disguised as cousins, brothers, old college friends. The playbook was almost standardized. Fabricate a sympathetic backstory. Exploit the husband's empathy. Install the other man under his roof. I read those threads for 4 hours. My hands were steady the entire time. Something in me had already known. I started building my case quietly. I asked Marco if he'd be willing to put together a resume so I could help him find work. He agreed. The resume listed his education, his work history, his full legal name, Marco Antonio Reyes. No mention of Bellamy. No name change documentation. The timeline of his employment showed continuous residence in a city 4 hours from Renee's hometown. He hadn't grown up where she grew up. He hadn't grown up in her family at all. That weekend, I told Renee I had a work trip near her hometown. I suggested she come along so we could visit her parents. I framed it casually already, knowing she'd refuse proximity to her actual parents. It was the one variable she couldn't control, so it was easier for her to say no. As expected, she said she was busy, but she kept asking me if I would be visiting her parents. I said no, I won't visit them alone. We can plan for the next time. In reality, I had no work trip. I went to her hometown only to meet her parents and uncover her truth. I don't want to get into the details of how I sourced their address. It was on her ID. So I went to their house and immediately told them not to reveal this to Renee because I was planning a surprise for her. Renee's birthday was around the corner a day after tomorrow. So I told them that I was arranging a surprise party for Renee and went there to invite them in person. They were pleased to receive me. Gerald shook my hand with both of his. Diane hugged me in the doorway. Their home was warm, cluttered with family photos, and nothing times about these people suggested the cold, controlling fundamentalists Renee had described. While speaking to them, I eventually opened up and told them that they don't seem conservative at all, not the way Renee had described. Gerald's face changed. Diane set down her tea. Conservative, Gerald said. We begged that girl to stay. I asked about their son. Gerald said, Ryan's in Seattle. We talk every Sunday. I asked carefully if they had another son, a younger one, named Marco. They looked at each other, then back at me, who Diane said slowly is Marco. I drove back to the hotel that night with every window down 80 miles an hour on an empty highway, and the only thought cycling through my head was this. Right now in my apartment, in the home I pay for, Renee and Marco are alone together. And they know exactly what they are to each other. Her birthday was in 2 days, and her parents had just accepted my invitation. I didn't sleep that night. Not because of anger. Anger would have been simpler. I lay in that hotel bed running the math on every conversation, every tear, every perfectly rationed detail she'd fed me over 3 years, and what kept me awake was the precision. This wasn't impulsive. This was architecture. I drove home the next morning, one day before her birthday. Marco was eating cereal at the kitchen counter, and Renee was blow-drying her hair in the bathroom. Everything looked normal. Everything had always looked normal. That was the craft of it. How was the trip, she asked when I kissed her cheek. Productive, I said. Actually, I want to do something special for your birthday tomorrow. Stay home. I'll handle everything. She smiled. The same smile from our second date, the one I'd once mistaken for vulnerability. You don't have to do all that. I want to, I said. I really want to. I spent that day in a kind of surgical calm. I bought a cake. I ordered flowers. I texted Gerald and Diane the address and the time 6 o'clock come straight up the door would be open. Diane sent back a string of heart emojis and wrote that she couldn't wait to see her baby girl. I stared at that message for a long time. These people loved Renee. They had never stopped. She had invented their cruelty the way a novelist invents weather to set the scene for a character who doesn't exist. The morning of her birthday, Renee woke up happy. She stretched across the bed and pulled me toward her and said, 30 looks good on me, don't you think I told her it did? Marco knocked on the bedroom door and wished her happy birthday through the wood. She laughed. I watched the ease between them, the familiarity that I'd once read as sibling comfort, and I saw it clearly now. The way her voice softened half a register when she spoke to him. The way his knock was gentle, almost intimate, 2 taps instead of 3. I told her I was handling dinner. She should relax, get dressed up, enjoy the day. She spent the afternoon doing her makeup while Marco sat on the couch scrolling his phone. At one point I walked past and he looked up at me with those tired eyes and said, "This is really cool of you, man." "Family's important," I said. He nodded. He had no idea what he was nodding to. By 5:30, Renee was in a green dress, her hair pinned up, standing in the kitchen, finishing a salad she'd insisted on making because she said she couldn't just contribute nothing. Marco had changed into a clean shirt. The apartment smelled like garlic and candle wax and the ordinary machinery of a life that had never been real. At 5:58, my phone buzzed. Gerald times. We're in the lobby. Asterisk. I told Renee I'd forgotten something in the car and went downstairs. Gerald was wearing a blazer. Diane was holding a wrapped gift with a bow that looked like she'd spent an hour on it. I shook Gerald's hand, hugged Diane, and led them to the elevator. "She's going to be so surprised," Diane whispered. "Yes," I said. "She is." I opened the apartment door and stepped aside. Diane walked in first. Then Gerald. The hallway opens directly into the kitchen and living room, one continuous space, and Renee was standing at the counter with a knife in one hand and a tomato in the other, and Marco was 3 feet away leaning against the fridge. Diane said, "Baby?" Renee's head turned. The knife stopped. Her lips parted, but nothing came out. Her eyes went from her mother to her father to me, and I watched the blood leave her face in real time like someone had pulled a plug at the base of her throat. Gerald stepped forward, arms open, and then he saw Marco. He stopped. His arms lowered. "What are you doing here?" Gerald said. Not to Renee, to Marco. Marco straightened. His mouth opened. Closed. "You know each other," I said. I already knew, but I needed the room to hear it. "That's Marco Reyes," Gerald said, his voice flattening into something I hadn't heard from him before. "He's the reason we almost lost our daughter." Renee set the knife down. Her hands were shaking. "Dad, let me..." He's been living here, I said, for 3 months. Renee told me he was your son, that you disowned him for being gay. The silence that followed had texture. Diane's gift hit the floor. Gerald turned to Renee with an expression I can only describe as a man watching something he built catch fire. Oh, I said Ryan didn't come. It would have made things easier, isn't it? Renee flinched, like I'd struck her. Gerald crossed the kitchen in 4 steps, grabbed Marco by the collar of his clean shirt, and dragged him toward the door. Marco didn't resist. He went limp the way someone goes limp when they've always known this moment was coming. Gerald shoved him into the hallway and pointed at the elevator and said something quiet I couldn't hear, and Marco walked away without looking back. Diane was crying. Renee was standing in her green birthday dress in the kitchen she'd been cooking in 2 minutes ago, and she looked at me, and for the first time in our marriage, I saw her without a story prepared. How long? She whispered. Long enough, I said. The divorce took 11 weeks. She signed everything without contest. No negotiation, no lawyers jousting over assets. She showed up to the finalization alone, thinner, wearing no makeup. She didn't look at me. Gerald removed her from the family will. I know this because Diane called me 3 weeks after it was finalized, sobbing into the phone. She said Marco had relapsed. She said Renee was still with him. She said she didn't understand how her daughter, her brilliant, sharp, capable daughter, could throw away everything for a man who couldn't stay clean for 6 consecutive months. I didn't have an answer for her. I still don't. What I keep coming back to is this. Renee built an entire mythology. Cold parents, a disowned brother, a woman who'd clawed her way to freedom, and she built it so well that I married the character, not the person. Every detail measured, every tear placed. The woman I admired for her resilience was real, in a way I hadn't understood. She was times resilient. She maintained a lie across years, across a marriage, across the daily architecture of a shared life without a single crack I could see until a piece of mail arrived with the wrong name. That's not weakness. That's a kind of terrifying talent. And she spent all of it on Marco Reyes, a man who the last I heard was sleeping on someone's floor. I think about that sometimes. How the sharpest person I've ever known made the dumbest choice I've ever seen and made it over and over and over again and called it love. My mother-in-law once left a voicemail for my own mother where she bragged, and I quote, "I get people to do what I want for a living." I laughed it off back then. I have not laughed about it in a very long time. So here's the short version. I married into a family where love is basically a rewards program. My mother-in-law runs it like a CEO, and my biggest mistake was helping her golden child move 100 yards from my front door, because now my 3.5-year-old daughter gets to watch her grandparents walk right past our house to spoil her cousin every single day. I'm 34 female and I am running on fumes. My husband is Kyle, he's 35, and he spent his whole life trying to earn something from his mother that she was never actually selling. His mom is Barbara, early 60s, and if manipulation were a profession, she'd have a corner office, which she basically admits. His dad is Don, acts like he's too busy with golf to notice anything, but funny how he's always available when it's the other grandkid. Kyle's younger brother is Ryan, early 30s. Barbara's compliant one, the good son, and his wife Megan is honestly one of the kindest people I know, which makes all of this so much harder. The thing you need to understand about Barbara is that she announced herself early. I just wasn't listening. Our wedding was the first real test. Kyle and I planned it ourselves, paid for it ourselves, and Barbara treated that independence like a personal insult. She called about the seating chart. Then she called about the schedule. Then she called about who would stand where in family photos, which relatives deserved +1s, whether the ceremony was too long or the cocktail hour too short. When I politely held my ground on a few decisions, my wedding, my call, she went quiet in a way that felt less like acceptance and more like someone writing your name in a ledger. That's when the voicemail happened. She called my mother ostensibly to discuss logistics and left a rambling message that ended with that line. Asterisk, I get people to do what I want for a living. Asterisk. My mom played it for me with wide eyes. I laughed. Actually laughed. She's just intense, I said. Ryan pulled me aside at the rehearsal dinner. He had this tight, careful smile, the kind you learn when you grow up in a house where the wrong expression gets cataloged. Just so you know, he said quietly, you don't want her mad. Trust me, it's not worth it. I thanked him. I thought he was being dramatic. He wasn't being dramatic. He was giving me the only survival manual he had. The silent treatment started during my first pregnancy. Kyle and I had hit a rough patch, normal marriage stuff amplified by hormones and stress, and somehow Barbara got wind of it. Instead of support, she sent Kyle a letter. A handwritten, multi-page letter encouraging him to consider divorce. From his mother, while his wife was pregnant. Kyle showed it to me with shaking hands. Not shaking from anger. Shaking the way someone shakes when the person who's supposed to love them unconditionally just put conditions in writing. We started therapy. Our couple's therapist listened to about 3 sessions worth of Barbara's stories before she set her pen down and said something I'll never forget. Your mother-in-law is a piece of work and she will never change. You need to decide what you're willing to live with. We weren't ready to hear that. We filed it away, under maybe later, and kept trying. Then I almost died. Preeclampsia. Severe. My blood pressure spiked so high the doctors were prepping for an emergency delivery, while Kyle stood in the hallway, calling his parents to tell them their grandchild might be coming 10 weeks early. Barbara's response was measured almost clinical. She asked logistical questions. She did not ask how I was feeling. She did not come to the hospital. Our daughter arrived safely a few weeks early, but healthy, and something shifted. Barbara showed up for the baby. She was attentive, even warm in those fragile newborn months. I let myself believe the therapist was wrong. I let myself believe a granddaughter had done what a daughter-in-law couldn't, cracked something open in her. That peace lasted until Megan got pregnant. The moment Ryan and Megan announced their pregnancy, I felt the temperature change. Not from Megan. Megan was glowing, and I was genuinely thrilled for her. From Barbara, it was like watching someone spot a better investment. Her visits to our daughter didn't stop immediately. They tapered. Gradually enough that you'd question yourself if you tried to name the exact week it started. When their son was born, Barbara was at the hospital for the delivery. She posted about it on Facebook before Megan's own parents knew. She took a week off work. She cooked meals, organized the nursery, stayed overnight. She had not done any of those things for us. Kyle didn't say anything about it. He just got quieter. He has this way of going still when something hits the old wound jaw, set eyes fixed on some middle distance, and I've learned not to push. He was processing a lifetime of being the son who tried harder and got less. Then Megan mentioned they were thinking of moving closer to us. They'd been living 40 minutes away, and with the baby, the commute to see family was wearing on them. My heart jumped. I loved Megan. I wanted our kids to grow up together. So I immediately went to work trying to help them find a good house in the area. We ended up helping Ryan and Megan get a house in our fairly small 100-house neighborhood. It's a very nice and unique neighborhood with large lots that aren't typical in our area. The houses typically don't even have to be put on the market to sell because the school district is that desirable. We pulled strings. We made calls. We did not fully think this through. Our relationship with Barbara had always been so separate from our relationship with Ryan and Megan, mainly because Kyle and Ryan don't really have a relationship because Barbara designed it that way. But Megan and I did. I thought proximity would strengthen that bond. I didn't consider that proximity would also give Barbara a permanent stage. In January of this year, they moved into their new house, 100 yards from ours. And then we learned about the money. Barbara and Don gave Ryan and Megan $250,000 toward their purchase. They'd given us $100,000 for ours years earlier, which we'd been genuinely grateful for. I did the math. Then I did it again. Then I stopped doing math and started watching. Barbara's car began appearing in Ryan's driveway 3-4 times a week. Don, who'd missed our daughter's birthday because of a golf tournament, was suddenly spotted unloading groceries from his trunk on a Tuesday afternoon at Ryan's house, on our street. And my daughter, my bright, observant 3.5-year-old daughter, started asking questions I didn't know how to answer. Mama, how come Grandma's at their house again? I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. That was the week everything finally broke. It broke in pieces. Small, specific pieces that I cataloged the way you catalog evidence when you're building a case you don't want to win. The first piece, our daughter got sick. Not emergency room sick, but miserable fever of 103 glassy eyes that pitiful whimper kids make when they don't understand why their body is betraying them. I texted Barbara. Not to ask for help, just to let her know. Grandparent courtesy. She responded with a thumbs up emoji and said she hoped she felt better soon. 2 hours later, Megan texted me that Barbara had just arrived at their house because their son had the same bug. Same virus, probably passed between the cousins at a playdate earlier that week. Barbara brought homemade soup, Pedialyte popsicles, and a stuffed elephant she'd picked up on the way over. She stayed until bedtime. I stared at my phone in my daughter's dark room, her sweaty head on my chest, and felt something I can only describe as a click. Like a lock engaging. Like the last tumbler falling into place on something I'd been refusing to see clearly for years. The second piece, Christmas. Barbara gave our nephew a battery-powered ride-on truck, a personalized storybook, a monogram backpack for preschool, and a set of wooden toys that I later looked up $180. Our daughter opened her gifts from Grandma and Grandpa on our living room floor, a clearance sticker shirt from Marshall's, a coloring book, and a pack of hair ties. I know they were clearance because Barbara hadn't peeled the orange sticker off the shirt. Maybe she forgot. Maybe she didn't care enough to check. Maybe, and this is the thought that woke me up at 3 a.m., she wanted me to see it. Kyle held the shirt up after our daughter ran off to play. He turned it over in his hands. looked at the sticker, set it down on the counter without a word, and went to the garage. I heard him start the leaf blower even though it was December and there were no leaves. The third piece, overnights. Barbara told us to our faces that she wouldn't keep our daughter overnight until she was fully potty trained. I just can't deal with accidents at my age, she said with this practice-sounding sigh. Fine. Except their nephew, who is a full year and a half younger and nowhere near potty-trained, sleeps at Barbara and Don's house every other weekend. Megan mentioned it casually. She wasn't rubbing it in. Megan doesn't have that in her. She just didn't know about the rule because the rule was never about potty training. The fourth piece, Don. Quiet golf obsessed. I'm just along for the ride, Don. The man who'd missed our daughter's third birthday because he had a tournament he couldn't get out of. I'd accepted that. Don loves golf. Don is Don. Except now, Don's truck was parked at Ryan's house on a Tuesday, then a Thursday, then Saturday morning bright and early unloading a toy kitchen from his truck bed while our daughter watched from our front window. Mama, is Papa bringing us something too? No, baby, not today. How come? I didn't answer. I just picked her up and carried her to the back of the house where she couldn't see the street. Kyle and I sat at our kitchen table that night after she was asleep. I had my phone open to a post I'd written on a parenting forum, just vomiting the whole story out to strangers because I didn't trust my own perception anymore. The responses were already pouring in. Hundreds of them. Kyle read over my shoulder. He didn't speak for a long time. Then his hand came up and pressed against his eyes, and his shoulders did something I'd only seen once before the day he showed me his mother's divorce letter. It's not going to get better, he said. The therapist told us. Years ago. I know. I kept thinking, if I just... He stopped, swallowed. If I was just enough. If I did enough. She'd... I know, Kyle. He dropped his hand. His eyes were red, but his jaw was set in that way. I recognized that stillness that used to look like stoicism, but I now understood was a man who learned very young that crying made things worse. We're done, he said. Not a question. We're done. We went no contact the following week. No letter, no dramatic phone call, no explanation Barbara could twist into evidence of our unreasonableness. Just silence. The thing she'd weaponized against us for years returned to sender. We grieve Ryan and Megan separately. We know what $250,000 buys. It buys Thanksgiving attendance and Sunday dinners and the inability to say times your mother is cruel times without risking everything. Megan still texts me. I still love her, but I can feel Barbara's gravity pulling her into orbit, and I know the math. I can't compete with $250,000 and a woman who lives to control. Our daughter will ask harder questions soon. She'll want to know why Grandma's car is always at her cousin's house but never at ours. She'll want to know what she did wrong, and I will get down on my knees and hold her face in my hands and tell her times, nothing. You did nothing wrong. Some people have a sickness in the way they love, and it was never ever about you. Asterisk. I will say it as many times as she needs to hear it. I will say it until she believes it. And then I will say it to Kyle because he needed to hear it 30 years ago, and no one ever did. My wife told her ex-boyfriend that I love her too much to ever leave, and they both laughed about it. She didn't know I was listening to every single word. So my wife is a social media influencer with hundreds of thousands of followers, and I caught her carrying on a full-blown affair with the ex she swore was out of her life forever. But instead of confronting her right away, I spent weeks collecting every conversation, every lie, every mocking little comment she made about me, and then I used her own playbook against her. The woman who built her career on cameras forgot that cameras work both ways. I'm a 28-year-old data analyst. My wife is Bianca, 27 influencer, brand ambassador, and apparently a world-class liar. The guy she's been sneaking around with is Marcus, her ex-boyfriend of 3 years, who conveniently works at one of the brands she promotes. And my best friend Derek, he's the one who helped me document everything when the time came. Let me give you some background first. I've been cheated on before. Not by Bianca, by a girlfriend in college who spent 6 months making me feel insane for questioning her late nights and locked phone. When the truth finally came out, the betrayal wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was realizing I'd seen every sign and talked myself out of believing my own eyes. I promised myself I'd never do that again. Bianca and I got married 2 years ago after dating for 3. She was already building her platform when we met: lifestyle content, brand partnerships, the whole ecosystem. I didn't mind being part of it. She'd film us cooking together, doing couples Q&As, little date night vlogs. Her followers ate it up. Couple goals, they'd comment. He looks at her like she's the whole universe. And honestly, I did. I was in love with the version of Bianca she showed me, and I thought that version was real. About a year into our marriage, Marcus resurfaced. They dated for 3 years before me, and she always described the breakup as mutual but messy. When his name popped up in her DMs because he'd gotten hired at one of the brands she promoted, she showed me the message herself. Unprompted. "Look, babe, small world," she said, rolling her eyes. I asked if it would be weird. She kissed my forehead and said, "He's nobody. That chapter's been closed for years." I believed her. Because I wanted to. 4 weeks ago, Bianca started working from home more frequently. New content strategy, she said, more authentic, less studio polished. I work remotely too, so in theory, this should have brought us closer. More lunches together, more random coffee breaks, more of the easy intimacy that makes a marriage feel alive. Instead, something shifted. It started small. I'd walk into the living room and she'd switch apps so fast her thumb blurred across the screen. I'd come up behind her at her desk and she'd slam her laptop shut, then laugh it off. "Surprise collab, babe. Can't spoil it." The first time I shrugged. The second time my stomach tightened. By the fifth time, that old alarm system, the one I'd built in college and never fully dismantled, was screaming. I brought it up gently. "You've been kind of guarded with your phone lately. Everything okay?" And here's what got me. She didn't get defensive. She overcorrected, handed me her phone with this open-wounded expression, scrolled through her recent text like she was presenting evidence of her own innocence. "See, nothing. You can look at anything you want." Every conversation was clean, sanitized. The kind of clean that doesn't happen naturally. That's when I knew. A week later, we went to a get-together with some of her influencer friends. Bianca spent the entire dinner texting under the table. Between bites, between sentences, sometimes mid-sentence. Her friend Tara asked her a question and Bianca didn't even hear it, just sat there smiling at her screen with a softness I hadn't seen directed at me in weeks. When she caught me watching, she locked the phone and said, "Sorry, Brand, emergency." That night after she fell asleep, I made a decision. Not an emotional one, a calculated one. I'm a data analyst. Pattern recognition is literally what I do for a living. So I installed a mirroring app on both our phones, hers during a shower the next morning, mine as the receiving end. Everything synced. Messages, call logs, app, activity. Within 48 hours, I had the full picture. Bianca was in daily contact with Marcus, not professional contact. The messages were intimate, explicit, laced with inside jokes and pet names. I guess their love rekindled when he came back into the picture. They'd been seeing each other for at least 2 months. He knew my work schedule. He knew which days I had late meetings. He knew when I went to the gym. But the call, the intercepted call, that's what broke something inside me permanently. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Bianca told me she forgot to grab groceries and needed to run out. I watched her drive away, then opened the mirroring app and listened in real time as she called Marcus from the parking lot of a Whole Foods she never walked into. They talked for 22 minutes. She complained about having to perform for me. Marcus laughed and called me the safety net. And then Bianca said the words that I will hear for the rest of my life. "Jackie would never leave me. He loves me too much. Poor thing." Marcus laughed. She laughed. And something behind my ribs went cold and quiet. Now the thing is, I'm so sure Bianca is not supposed to be involved with any of the company's staff or bad-mouthing the company. During that same call, they trashed the brand. Marcus venting about management, Bianca mocking the products she smiles about in sponsored posts. If the organization finds out, her contract will be terminated and her image will be tarnished. That night, Bianca told me she was going out for girls' night. I said, "Have fun, babe." I kissed her cheek. She smiled that influencer smile, warm, effortless, completely hollow. Then I called Derek. We followed her to a restaurant downtown. Not a club, not a bar, a quiet Italian place with dim lighting and corner booths, the kind of place you take someone you're not hiding from yourself, just from everyone else. Derek had his camera ready. We walked in through the side entrance and found them in the back. Bianca was tucked under Marcus's arm, her head against his shoulder, his hand on her thigh. She was laughing at something on his phone. The same laugh from the intercepted call. I stood there for 10 seconds. Derek recorded everything. Then I walked up to the table, pulled out a chair, and sat down across from them. Bianca's face went white. Marcus froze mid-sip. I didn't yell. I didn't curse. I just looked at her and said, "Poor thing showed up." Regarding the video my friend made, I haven't posted it online as intended because I have mixed feelings about it. For the past years, Bianca has maintained an excellent public image. And even though she gets dragged online by some of her annoying fans, she has not had any serious issues with the brands she influences. Right now, I'm going through so much emotionally, and I want to repay her for using me like that. I intend to leak the conversation between Bianca and her boyfriend and the video of them together. I have the intercepted calls where they trash the brand. I have the restaurant footage. I have every deleted message she thought was gone forever. The woman who built her empire on cameras is about to learn that cameras work both ways. I sat with those mixed feelings for 3 days. For the past years, Bianca had maintained an excellent public image. And even though she gets dragged online by some of her annoying fans, she had not had any serious issues with the brand she influences. Part of me, the part that still remembered the woman I'd married, hesitated. Right now, I was going through so much emotionally, and every hour, the weight shifted between grief and something sharper. Something with teeth. But then I'd hear it again. Asterisk. Poor thing. Asterisk. The laughter that followed. The casual cruelty of two people who'd turned my devotion into a punchline. I wanted to repay her for using me like that. So I stopped having mixed feelings. I started with her parents. I sent them a carefully compiled folder, the restaurant video screenshots of the intercepted messages, and the audio from the Whole Foods parking lot call. No commentary, no emotional plea. Just evidence time-stamped and organized because that's what I do. I'm a data analyst. I let the data speak. Her mother called me within an hour, sobbing. Her father didn't call at all. He texted one line times, "I'm sorry, son." Asterisk. Then I went public. I uploaded the restaurant footage to every platform Bianca had built her empire on. Derek helped me cut it clean. No narration, no captions, just the raw 30-second clip of my wife nestled under another man's arm in a candlelit booth, followed by the moment she looked up and saw me standing there. Her expression alone told the entire story, the blood draining from her face, the mouth opening and closing with no sound coming out, the hand pulling away from Marcus's thigh a full 3 seconds too late. Alongside the video, I posted the intercepted call excerpts. Not the intimate parts. I wasn't trying to humiliate her sexually. I posted the parts where she and Marcus trashed the brand. Marcus venting about incompetent management. Bianca mocking the very products she'd filmed herself using with that signature smile, calling them overpriced garbage. I wouldn't feed my dog. I posted her laughing about how easy it was to fake enthusiasm for sponsored content. I posted Marcus coaching her on which talking points to hit in her next campaign video while simultaneously calling the CEO a clown. The brand's social media team found it before their legal department did. By noon the next day, Bianca's contract was terminated. The official statement was diplomatic. We have chosen to part ways with Bianca Morales effective immediately, but the subtext was a controlled explosion. Within hours, Marcus was fired too. The company didn't even give him a meeting. Security escorted him out with a box. Then the dominoes started falling. 3 other sponsors pulled their partnerships by end of week. Her management company dropped her with a form email. The follower count that had taken her 5 years to build began hemorrhaging 10,000 the first day, 30,000 by the third. Comment sections she used to curate like gardens turned into graveyards of mockery and disbelief. Screenshots of her old couple's content circulated with new captions. Couple goals became couple fraud. Headlines picked her name up like carrion birds finding a carcass. Asterisk, influencers, perfect marriage exposed as elaborate lie. Asterisk, asterisk, brand ambassador, caught mocking, own sponsors and leaked audio. Asterisk, every outlet, every blog, every gossip account. The algorithm that had built her was now burying her. Bianca called me 47 times in 2 days. I let every call ring through to voicemail. The messages evolved like stages of grief, on fast forward, confusion, bargaining, fury, threats. Then I whispered, "Jackie, please, we can fix this at 3 a.m. that I deleted without finishing. What she did next, she did to herself. She showed up at my office on a Wednesday afternoon. I'd already moved out of our apartment and was staying with Derek. She stormed past reception, screaming my name, Mascara Street, voice cracking between rage and hysteria. Security removed her in under 4 minutes. 2 coworkers recorded it on their phones. I didn't even go downstairs. That Friday night, she found Derek's address. Derek called me at 11 p.m. "Brother, you need to see this." He'd heard the commotion from his living room and activated the security cameras I'd helped him install 2 years ago, irony layered on irony. The footage showed Bianca in the driveway, kitchen knife in hand, slashing all 4 of Derek's tires with methodical fury. Then she keyed a long, jagged scratch down the entire driver's side of his car. Then she picked up a landscaping stone and hurled it through his front window. The glass hadn't finished settling before Derek was on the phone with the police. We sued her for property damage. Both of us, Derek for the car and Window Me, as co-plaintiff for harassment. In court, Bianca's attorney tried a Hail Mary defense. I had fabricated everything out of jealousy, planted the messages, staged the restaurant encounter. The judge reviewed the video evidence, all of it, including the security footage of her destroying Derek's property, and ruled against her on every count. Marcus didn't show up. Not to court, not to support her, not even a text from what I heard. The man she'd burned her marriage for evaporated the moment the spotlight turned hot. The judge ordered full restitution. Bianca signed the divorce papers without contesting a single term. There was nothing left to contest. No leverage, no audience, no income, no partner waiting in the wings. Just a woman sitting in a courtroom in clothes she couldn't afford to dry clean anymore, staring at the table while a judge itemized the cost of her choices. I blocked her on everything that same afternoon. Every platform, every number, every possible point of contact. Derek did the same. Sometimes I think about what she said in that parking lot. Asterisk, he loves me too much to leave me. Asterisk, she was half right. I did love her too much. But she confused devotion with weakness, and by the time she realized the difference, the camera she built her life around had already captured everything. The influencer who lived by the lens died by the lens, and the poor thing walked away free. My mother-in-law spent years convincing my husband I was cheating on him. The proof: I changed my outfit for a work meeting once. That was enough to almost destroy the only family I'll ever have. So here's the short version. I married a man with a daughter I love like my own, especially because doctors told me I'd never have biological children. Everything was beautiful until his mother decided I wasn't worthy of the title mom and spent years whispering poison into my husband's ear until he snapped and said something I can't unhear. When the truth finally came out, it wasn't from him. I'm Mila, early 30s. My husband is Greg. His daughter is Lily, she's 7, and she's my whole world. His mother is Barbara, and she's the reason I'm telling you this story. Then there's Denise, my sister-in-law, who blew the whole thing wide open, and her husband Craig, Greg's brother who cut Barbara off years ago. Turns out he knew something I didn't. Let me tell you how it started. Not the big explosion that came later. I mean the slow, invisible shift that made me question my own sanity before I ever questioned my husband. Greg and I met 4 years ago. Lily was 3, and her birth mother had already checked out. Not dramatically, not in a way that makes for a good story. She just dissolved. Chose the bottle over bedtime stories, chose bar tabs over birthday parties. By the time Greg got full custody, Lily hadn't seen her in 8 months. She didn't cry about it. She was too young to cry about it. That's the part that broke me. I fell in love with both of them simultaneously, and I don't know which love hit harder. Greg was gentle then, attentive. He'd watch me read to Lily at night with his look on his face like he couldn't believe someone would choose them. His own father had walked out when he was 11. Craig was 13. Barbara raised them alone, and she never let anyone forget it. When I got my diagnosis, premature ovarian failure, the clinical term for times you will never carry a child, times Greg held me on the bathroom floor for 2 hours. He said, "We already have Lily." And I believed him because it was true. The first year was beautiful. Lily started calling me Mama on her own. Nobody taught her, she just decided. I remember the first time she was reaching for a juice box on the counter and said, "Mama, help." Greg's eyes went glassy. He kissed my forehead. Barbara, who was visiting that weekend, left the room without a word. I should have paid attention to that silence. The fracture happened in October. Lily's gymnastics practice a Thursday. Greg was in a meeting he couldn't leave. I was on a work call that ran 40 minutes over a client in a different time zone who wouldn't stop talking. The gym called Greg first, then me. By the time I got there, Lily was sitting on a bench with her coach, her left arm cradled against her chest, tears dried in streaks on her face. She wasn't crying anymore. That was worse. I drove to the ER doing 15 over the speed limit, singing her favorite song badly to keep her distracted, and I called Greg from the parking lot. He arrived 20 minutes later and I expected him to be scared, grateful, something soft. Instead, he looked at me like I was the fracture. "Where were you?" "I told you." The call ran. The call. Right. He took Lily from my arms, literally lifted her away from me and carried her inside without another word. I stood in the hospital parking lot with my hand still shaped around a child who wasn't there anymore. That night, after Lily was asleep with her new pink cast, Greg said, "Something I've replayed 1,000 times. You know what your problem is, Mila? You think showing up late and feeling bad about it is the same as showing up on time." My throat closed. Because my father used to show up late. To everything. To my recitals, my graduations, my life. Greg knew this. He'd held me through the telling of it. "That's not fair," I whispered. "Neither is a kid sitting alone with a broken arm." He went to bed. I sat on the couch until 3 a.m. wondering if he was right. 2 weeks later, I picked Lily up from school 15 minutes late. Traffic, an accident, on Route 9, nothing I could control. But Lily was the last kid in the pickup line, and when she climbed into the car, she didn't say anything. She just buckled her seatbelt with her good hand and stared out the window. That quiet gutted me. So I canceled everything. My entire weekend, the freelance project, the grocery run, the call with my college friend. I built a blanket fort in the living room. We did face masks. I painted her cast with tiny daisies while she picked the colors. We made pancakes shaped like animals, and hers looked more like animals than mine, and she laughed so hard milk came out of her nose. By Sunday night, she was asleep on my chest, and I thought, Times, this is what I'm here for. Asterisk. Greg came home from his work trip Monday morning. Lily ran to him screaming "Daddy," and immediately started telling him about the fort, the pancakes, the daisies. She was radiant. Greg looked at me over her head. No warmth, no gratitude. Something clinical. That evening after Lily was in bed, he sat across from me at the kitchen table and said it. Do you think you can be a proper mother figure for once in your life? My whole body went still. Not frozen time still, asterisk, like the air had been vacuumed out of the room. What did you just say to me? You heard me. You're too childish. You're too lenient. You think a blanket fort fixes being careless. I wasn't times careless times, Greg. I was 15 minutes. It's a pattern, Mila. A times, pattern times. My voice cracked upward. I have been here every single day. I have loved that little girl like she came from my own, but she didn't. Silence. The kind that has a sound. His jaw tightened like even he knew he'd crossed something, but he didn't take it back. He just sat there, arms folded, wearing an expression I didn't recognize, not anger exactly, but something underneath it, something terrified. And I, exhausted, cornered, vibrating with a hurt I couldn't name, said the worst thing I've ever said in my life. If I'm so unfit, Greg, send her to her mother. Let Rachel handle it. I'm sure she's sober enough by now to remember she has a daughter. The words left my mouth and immediately turned to ash. Greg's face went white. Not red times white asterisk. He stood up, looked at me like I'd put my hands on Lily myself, and walked out of the house. I sat at that table for an hour. Then I packed a bag and drove to my mother's. I didn't know it yet, wouldn't know for another 3 days, but every single accusation Greg had thrown at me had been scripted by someone else. And the dislike ran this deep. It was normal for Barbara to call me names behind my back, say I'm not on their level, tell my husband that I'm using him for his money, even though till his latest promotion, I was making more than him. And he always joked to mention in front of his family that I was a breadwinner. Now, it makes sense why, but I didn't know any of that yet. All I knew was that my phone was dark, my husband hadn't called, and the only person who reached out that night was the last person I expected. Denise's name lit up my screen at 1:47 p.m. Asterisk, don't say anything yet, just listen. I need to tell you what Barbara's been doing. Asterisk. Denise talked for 47 minutes. I know because I watched the call timer the way you watch a fuse burn. She started with an apology. Not the polite kind, the kind that comes out ragged like she'd been rehearsing it for years and still couldn't get it smooth. I should have told you sooner. Craig wanted to. I kept saying it wasn't our place and I was wrong and I'm sorry. Then she told me everything. Barbara's campaign hadn't started recently. It started before the wedding. The first year Greg and I were dating, Barbara told him I was playing house, that no woman my age falls in love with a man's child that fast unless she's after something else. When Greg pushed back, Barbara shifted tactics. She didn't attack me directly to his face anymore. She asked questions instead. Asterisk. Has Mila mentioned wanting to go back to work full-time? Asterisk. Asterisk. Does she ever seem restless? Asterisk. Asterisk. I just worry, honey. Women who can't have their own children sometimes resent the ones who aren't theirs. Asterisk. Drip, drip, drip. She's been doing this to Greg since you moved in together, Denise said. Every time he stood up for you, her response was the same times. It's not like she'll be the mother of my grandchild one day. Asterisk. My hand pressed flat against my sternum. I could feel my heartbeat in my fingertips. It kind of makes sense now, I said slowly why she had a whole hissy fit when I miscarried the first year of my marriage. Denise went quiet. Then she times, what asterisk? I never went into details about my medical condition with her. I just mentioned I couldn't have a child of my own. But that first year, before I understood the full diagnosis, there was a pregnancy. 5 weeks. It didn't hold. My voice was steady, which surprised me. Barbara cried at dinner about it. I thought she was being compassionate. She kept saying, times these things happen for a reason, asterisk. Mila. Denise's voice was thin. She called Craig that night and said, well, at least now Greg won't be trapped. I pulled the phone away from my ear, stared at it, put it back. Tell me the rest. The rest was worse. When I started working from home, freelance design flexible hours so I could be present for Lily, Barbara reframed it. Asterisk. She's home all day doing what exactly times? When I started taking client meetings in person, dressing professionally, driving to studios downtown, Barbara connected dots that didn't exist. She told Greg I was going out a lot for someone who works from home. She mentioned that I'd changed my wardrobe, that I seemed distracted. She never said the word times affair asterisk. She didn't have to. She built the architecture and let Greg's abandonment terror fill in the walls. He never accused me, I said. Not once. Because he couldn't. If he said it out loud and it wasn't true, he'd have to face where the thought came from. I closed my eyes. The kitchen table. Greg's folded arms. That expression I couldn't name, not anger. Terror asterisk. He wasn't attacking my parenting. He was testing whether I'd leave. There's one more thing Denise said, and this is the one that made Craig and me decide we had to tell you. Last year's Mother's Day, Lily asked her grandma if she could get a gift for Mom. She referred to me. She said, "Times Mom asterisk." Barbara told her a 6-year-old child with daisy-painted fingernails and a gap-toothed smile that Mila wasn't her mother, that she should make a card for Grandma instead. That calling someone Mom doesn't make them your mom? Lily came home that day and called me Mila for the first time. I remember standing at the stove, wooden spoon, frozen mid-stir, feeling something break that I couldn't locate. She went back to Mama within a week on her own because children are more honest than the adults who wound them. I never told Greg about that day. I thought I'd imagined the shift. Craig cut Barbara off 2 years ago, Denise said. That's why she doubled down on Greg. He's the one she can still control. I didn't sleep. I sat on my mother's guest bed with the phone face down on the mattress and did the math that no one teaches you to do. Greg hadn't called. 16 hours and nothing. Either he was sitting in our kitchen marinating in the same poison that had been dripping into him for 4 years, or he was on the phone with Barbara getting the next dose. Both options led to the same place. Here's what I kept circling. I could forgive the cruelty. People say terrible things when they're terrified, and Greg had been fed a story designed to activate every wound his father left behind. I understood that. I did, but he chose times not to ask me. He had a question times. Are you faithful? Are you staying? Do you love my daughter? Or are you performing times? And instead of asking it, he let his mother answer for me. For years, he watched me braid Lily's hair and read her stories and hold her through nightmares, and he still let Barbara's version sit louder than what was right in front of him. That wasn't fear. That was a choice. My phone lit up. Not Greg. Denise again times Craig. Wants to talk to Greg with you present. Say the word and we'll come. Asterisk. I typed and deleted 4 responses. Landed on times. If I confront him and he denies it, I lose everything. If I don't confront him, I lose everything. Slower. Asterisk. Her reply came fast times. Then, at least make it on your terms. Asterisk. I stared at the ceiling. Somewhere across town, Lily was sleeping in her bed with a fading pink cast and daisies I'd painted in a house where the woman who loved her most had just been driven out, and the woman who claimed to love her most was probably already on the phone telling Greg he was better off. The question was never whether I could forgive Greg. The question was whether Greg could become someone worth forgiving. I picked up the phone and called Denise back. Tell Craig to set it up. But I need to see Lily first, before any of it. I need her to know I didn't leave times her asterisk. Silence. Then Denise quietly, she already knows Mila. That kid has always known. Maybe. But I needed to say it anyway. Because that's what mothers do, even the ones nobody thinks count. My mother-in-law told me I disgraced her family's genetics by existing. At her husband's birthday party, in front of 40 relatives, while standing in a house I paid for. So here's the situation. My in-laws worship beauty like a religion, and I was their heresy. They lived rent-free in a home I bought, mocked me daily for my appearance, and when I finally asked for basic respect, they chose homelessness over apologizing. Then their golden child daughter dumped them in a care facility, and suddenly the ugly daughter-in-law was the only phone number worth dialing. I'm 31 female and apparently not pretty enough to deserve gratitude. My husband is Lior, 31, the only one in his family who sees people instead of faces. His mother is Vivian, 61, a woman who weaponized beauty her entire life. His father, Gerald, 65, enabled every cruel word. And his sister, Nadine, 34, played the devoted daughter right up until devotion got inconvenient. The thing about marrying into the Ashford family is that nobody warns you. The audition never ends. I met Lior at a hospital fundraiser. I was there because I had organized it. He was there because his company had donated imaging equipment. He asked me to dinner that night, and I said yes, because he looked at me like I was already enough. I didn't know then that his family operated on an entirely different metric. Vivienne had been a catalog model in the 80s, not famous regional. Department store circulars, the occasional magazine spread for a mid-tier jewelry brand. But she'd built an identity around it that calcified into doctrine. Beauty was virtue. Beauty was proof of worth. She passed this gospel to Nadine, who inherited her mother's cheekbones and wielded them like credentials, and to Lior, who quietly rejected it and never told anyone why. The first time I met Vivienne, she held my face between her manicured fingers and turned it side to side like she was inspecting fruit at a market. Interesting bone structure, she said, which I later learned was the most generous thing she'd ever say about me. We married small. Vivienne wore black. The house situation started 2 years before Gerald's birthday party. Lior and I had been married for a year when his parents' financial situation collapsed. Gerald's investment portfolio imploded bad bets on speculative real estate, compounded by pride that prevented him from pulling out early. They were about to lose their home. Vivienne called Lior sobbing, and Lior called me. Here's what people don't understand. I didn't help because I was naive. I helped because my own parents taught me that family means showing up even when it costs you. My father had worked 32 years in municipal water management, so my mother could stay home with my disabled brother. Sacrifice wasn't abstract to me. It was Tuesday. I had savings, substantial savings earmarked for my parents' retirement care. I redirected 85% of it toward the EMI on a house in Vivienne and Gerald's neighborhood, a house Lior had been about to sell because he couldn't carry the payments alone. I covered it. We transferred ownership to my name because that was the legal reality of who was paying. And then we moved his parents in, rent-free, no questions asked. For 3 years, I said nothing. Not when Vivienne rearranged the furniture I'd chosen and told guests it was her home. Not when Gerald referred to me as Lior's wife instead of my name at family dinners, as if naming me would make my presence too real. Not when Nadine visited every other Sunday and the three of them would sit in the living room speaking French, a language I don't speak, while I prepared food in the kitchen. I said nothing because I believed grace was cumulative, that eventually the sheer weight of my kindness would crack something open in them. I was wrong. Gerald's 65th birthday. 42 relatives packed into the house. My house and Vivienne had spent 3 weeks planning it like a state dinner. I'd funded the catering. I'd taken 2 days off work to help set up. I was carrying a tray of hors d'oeuvres through the living room when I heard my name. Not my name. Or Vivienne called me when she thought I couldn't hear. That weird-looking girl has disgraced this family's genetics just by existing. Look at her. Look at my son. People ask me if she's his time's assistant, asterisk. Laughter. Not all 42 relatives. But enough. I stopped walking. The tray trembled in my hands. Vivienne saw me and didn't flinch. She time-straightened, asterisk. Oh, good, you heard. Maybe now you'll understand why I keep asking Lior to reconsider. The room went silent. I set the tray down on the nearest table with a steadiness that surprised even me, and I walked out. Not dramatically. Not crying. I just left. I sat in my car for 40 minutes and stared at the steering wheel until my hands stopped shaking. That night, I told Lior I wanted the house back. He didn't hesitate. Not for 1 second. He called a family meeting the following weekend and laid it out, apologized to my wife, or vacate her property. Gerald intervened first. You don't have to be her puppet for that. You married her, and now she is doing her duty. Don't put her on a pedestal. Lior snapped. His voice cracked with something I'd never heard from him. Not anger exactly, but the sound of a man realizing his father had never once seen him clearly. I times respect times her for everything, and you should also respect her because she has let you live in her house for the last 3 years and never said a word. The silence that followed was surgical. They were shocked to know the house was mine. Lior told them the truth, that he'd been about to sell when I saved it, paid for 85% of the EMI, and that he'd transferred ownership to my name because it was the right thing to do. They didn't apologize. They didn't even blink toward remorse. Lior asked them directly. Apologize to her. Vivienne's lip curled. A-time simp, asterisk. My own son, a simp. It was her duty to help her husband at bad times. That's what wives do. That's not charity, that's obligation. Gerald nodded. Nadine on speakerphone said nothing, which was its own kind of vote. Then leave, Lior said quietly. And they did. Vivienne packed 3 suitcases, Gerald loaded them into Nadine's car, and they drove away from a house they didn't own, toward a daughter whose devotion had an expiration date they couldn't yet read. 2 weeks of silence followed. Then, at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, I woke to the sound of shattering glass. The front window of the living room. A brick wrapped in a page torn from one of Vivienne's old modeling composites her face at 23 jaw, tilted eyes full of a confidence that had curdled into cruelty over 40 years. No note. None was needed. Lior found me standing in the hallway in bare feet glass, glittering across the hardwood like scattered teeth. He pulled me back before I stepped forward. Don't move, he said, and his voice was the voice of a man who had just understood something final. The police came. Filed a report. Insufficient evidence, they said, though. The composite page told its own story. 2 nights later, my father, who had been staying with us while we prepared his room, found Gerald standing on the sidewalk at dusk, staring at the house. Not approaching. Just standing. My father, 71 years old with a replaced hip and a heart condition, went outside to ask if he needed something. Gerald told him his daughter had married above her station and that the house would come back to the Ashfords one way or another. My father came inside and sat down at the kitchen table and didn't speak for an hour. When he finally looked at me, his eyes were wet and he said, "I didn't raise you to be treated like this." That sentence broke something in me that Vivian's public humiliation hadn't, because my father had never once complained. Not when he worked double shifts, not when my brother's care costs consumed every vacation they might have taken. He had absorbed difficulty like soil absorbs rain, quietly, completely. And now, this man who had earned every ounce of peace I was trying to give him was being terrorized on a sidewalk by someone whose mortgage I had paid. I filed for the restraining order the next morning. The renovation took 3 months. I gutted the bathroom on the ground floor and rebuilt it with grab bars, a walk-in shower, a seat. I widened the door frames. I installed a ramp at the side entrance. Every modification was a sentence in a language Vivian would never understand. Times, "This is what love looks like when it isn't performed for an audience." Asterisk. My father moved in on a Saturday. He stood in the doorway of his room and touched the wall like he was confirming it was real. "This is mine," he asked. "This is yours." He unpacked a single framed photo of my mother, gone 4 years now, and set it on the nightstand, and that was enough. That was the whole ceremony. Lior severed contact with his parents formally, not through a dramatic phone call, through a letter handwritten 3 paragraphs long. I didn't read it. He didn't offer. But when he sealed the envelope, his hands were steady and his jaw was set in a way that told me the decision had been made long before the pen touched paper. The boy who had quietly rejected his mother's gospel of beauty had finally said so out loud. A year passed. I learned what happened next, not from Lior, not from Vivienne or Gerald, but from a cousin of Lior's named Mark, who called one evening with the careful tone people use when delivering news they find both terrible and inevitable. Nadine had moved her parents into Cedarbrook Assisted Living. Not gradually, not after a medical event. She'd simply informed them one morning that the arrangement wasn't working. Her boyfriend didn't like the tension, her apartment was too small, their presence was affecting her energy. She drove them to the facility, signed the intake paperwork, and left before lunch. Mark said Gerald had stood in the lobby holding his suitcase looking at the door Nadine had walked through and hadn't moved for 15 minutes. I set the phone down after the call and sat with the information. I expected to feel vindicated. I searched for it, that hot, righteous bloom of times I told you so, asterisk. It wasn't there. What I felt instead was a dull, familiar ache. The same ache I'd felt carrying that tray through the living room. The same ache I'd felt sitting in my car for 40 minutes. Not anger. Grief for people who couldn't stop destroying the bridges they stood on. Lior took it harder. He didn't cry. He went for a run at 10 o'clock at night and came back an hour later and stood in the shower until the water went cold. I didn't ask. I just left a towel on the hook and the hallway light on. Mark told me one more thing. Vivienne in the facility had been heard telling another resident that her son had been stolen by an ugly woman who tricked him and brought him to the streets, that the house had been taken from them, that they were victims of ingratitude. She was still performing, still curating the narrative. Even in her room she didn't choose surrounded by bodies that time, was softening and folding and diminishing the very process she'd spent a lifetime treating as moral failure she could not stop. Gerald, Mark said, mostly sat by the window. I asked Mark if they'd ever mentioned apologizing. He went quiet long enough that I knew the answer. No, he said, not once. I thanked him and hung up. That night I checked on my father. He was asleep in his accessible room in the house I'd paid for under a roof that nobody would take from him. My mother's photo watched from the nightstand. The grab bars gleamed faintly in the hallway light. I closed his door gently and stood there for a moment, my hand still on the knob. The Ashfords had worshipped beauty like it was a savings account, something that would compound and protect them. But beauty doesn't compound. It spends. And when it's gone, what's left is only what you built with your hands and your choices and your willingness to love people who couldn't love you back. I had built this. They had built Cedarbrook. And the ugliest thing in the whole story was that they would never ever see it.
I know how my husband tells this story. I'm the villain. The cheating wife who threw away a perfectly good marriage for a fling with an old high school boyfriend. He's the victim, the good guy who was betrayed in his own home. And in a way, he's not wrong. I did a terrible thing. But his story starts at the end. Mine starts with the silence. My husband, Mark, is a good man. I want to be clear about that. He pays the bills. He fixes things when they break. He never forgot my birthday. On paper, he was a perfect husband. But a marriage doesn't live on paper. It lives in the small spaces in between the big things. The look across a room, the hand on your back. When you're telling a stupid story, the way you talk about your day and know someone is actually listening. Those spaces in our marriage have been empty for years. Our life was a timetable. He'd get home from work, I'd have dinner ready. We'd eat while watching the news. He'd ask, "How was your day?" and be scrolling through his phone before I could finish my first sentence. Then we'd move to the couch. He'd put on a basketball game or some action movie he'd seen a dozen times, and I'd sit beside him, a ghost on our own sofa. I felt less like a wife and more like a roommate he happened to be sleeping with, a very efficient household manager. I was lonely. Not the kind of lonely you feel when you're by yourself, but the worst kind. The kind you feel when you're sitting right next to the person who is supposed to be your everything, and you've never felt further apart. When the pandemic hit, that quiet house became a prison. The silence wasn't just a lack of conversation anymore. It was a physical weight. We were trapped together, and the distance between us felt like a mile-wide canyon in our own living room. Then Alex came back into my life. We dated for a couple of years in high school, one of those sweet, innocent first loves. We stayed friends on social media over the years, liking a photo here and there, but that was it. When lockdown started, he posted that he was going crazy trying to work from his tiny studio apartment. On a whim, I messaged him. I told him we had a spare room we used for storage and that he was welcome to use it as an office. Mark didn't mind. He barely seemed to notice. Suddenly, there was noise in the house again. Good noise. Laughter. Alex and I would take coffee breaks in the kitchen and we'd talk. We talked about everything and nothing. Old teachers we hated. Dumb music we used to love. What we were afraid of, what we hoped for. He remembered things about me I hadn't thought about in a decade. He'd say, "You still do that little head tilt thing when you're really listening." And my heart would just ache. Because when was the last time Mark had noticed anything like that? Working together felt normal, easy. It was a lifeline. Mark was still in his own world, locked in his home office for meetings all day, emerging only for food before disappearing again. But now I didn't mind as much. My days had a spark in them again. The line between work and friendship started to blur so slowly I didn't even see it happening. A 5-minute coffee break would turn into a 30-minute lunch. Work would officially end at 5. But then we'd decide to order a pizza and play a few rounds of a video game to unwind. We'd sit on the floor of the living room shouting at the screen and laughing until our stomachs hurt. I was having more real, genuine fun in those few hours than I'd had with my own husband in 5 years. I felt alive. I felt seen. Then came the night on the couch. It had been a long, stressful week for both of us. We decided to watch some dumb comedy to switch our brains off. Mark was out with a friend, a rare pandemic-era outing. I was exhausted mentally and physically. Halfway through the movie, without even really thinking about it, I laid down and rested my head in Alex's lap. It wasn't sexual. It wasn't a move. It was just comfortable. Like leaning on your best friend. It was the simple, trusting touch that I had been starving for. In that moment, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. And of course, that's when Mark came home. He didn't say a word at first. He just stood in the doorway, his keys still in his hand, his face unreadable. The silence was heavy, terrifying. Alex immediately sat up, and I scrambled to sit on the other end of the couch, my heart pounding in my chest. The innocent comfort of a second ago had been twisted into something ugly and guilty under Mark's gaze. "What the hell is this?" he finally said, his voice low and dangerous. I tried to explain. "Mark, it's not what it looks like. We were just watching a movie. I was tired." He laughed, but it was a cold, bitter sound. "Tired? You looked pretty comfortable resting your head in his lap. In my house. On my couch." The fight exploded from there. He wasn't asking questions. He was making accusations. He didn't care that I was lonely or that our marriage was a hollow shell. All he saw was a violation of his property. He screamed at me, called me a slut, told Alex to get his stuff and get out and never come back. He never once asked me how I was feeling or why I might need comfort from someone else. It was all about his anger, his pride, his rules. He was a man whose territory had been invaded, and he was there to put me back in my place. That night, after Alex had gone and the house was silent again, the silence was different. It was hostile. Mark slept on the couch he had just reclaimed. Lying in our marital bed alone, I felt a chasm open up between us, one so deep and wide I knew I could never cross it. He hadn't just gotten angry. He had shown me that he saw me as a possession, not a partner. His rage didn't make me want to fix things. It pushed me away right into the arms of the one person who had been offering kindness instead of fury. A week later, things at home were still frozen. We moved around each other like strangers, speaking only when absolutely necessary. The air was thick with resentment. I was miserable, terrified, and so incredibly lonely. I missed my friend. So I called him. I told Mark I was going to the grocery store. I drove to a park and we just sat in my car and talked. And then I broke down crying and he held me. It was a terrible mistake, but it was the first time I had felt safe and understood in so long. That was the start of it. The real betrayal. The lies got easier after that. I'd meet Alex for lunch, for a walk, anything to escape the morgue. My home had become. Mark became even more distant, but in a strange new way. He stopped being angry and just became cold, watchful. Sometimes I'd catch him just looking at me from across the room with an expression I couldn't place. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't anger anymore. It was something else. Something calculating. A pit of dread lived in my stomach, a constant hum of anxiety, telling me something was deeply wrong. I knew a storm was coming, I just didn't know what it would look like. Then one Tuesday afternoon, I was making coffee in the kitchen, and he came home from work early. He walked in and just stood there in the doorway, watching me. He didn't say hello. He didn't move to put his bag down. He just stood there, his face a blank mask. My heart started hammering against my ribs. After a silence that felt like an eternity, he spoke. His voice was completely flat, devoid of any emotion at all. "We need to talk," he said. "In the bedroom. Now." I followed him, my feet feeling like they were sinking into the floor with every step. The pit of dread in my stomach had hardened into a block of ice. I knew this was it. This was the storm. I walked into our bedroom, the room where I had cried myself to sleep so many nights, and watched as he sat on the edge of the bed. Our bed. He didn't turn on the main light, just the small lamp on his nightstand, casting long, dark shadows across the room. He looked at me, and his eyes were the eyes of a stranger. "I know you've been seeing him," he said. The voice was the worst part. It wasn't angry, it wasn't sad. It was completely flat, like a doctor delivering a diagnosis. My body went into autopilot, the instinct to lie and protect myself kicking in. "Mark, I don't know what you're talking about. I told you after that night." He let out a short, sharp laugh that had no humor in it. It was a terrible sound. "Don't," he said, cutting me off. "Just for once, don't lie to me. I know you've been lying. I know about the park. I know about the lunches. I know about him coming here to this house while I'm at work." The air left my lungs. My mind was racing, trying to figure it out. Had someone seen us? Did he check my phone? How could he possibly know the details? He watched my confusion, his expression unmoving. And then he delivered the final blow, the two words that would tear down what little was left of our life together. "I have cameras." The floor fell out from under me. For a second, I couldn't process it. Cameras. It sounded like something from a movie. It couldn't be real. "What?" I whispered. "In the living room," he said, his voice as calm and steady as a surgeon's. He gestured vaguely to the ceiling corner of our bedroom. "And in here." I looked where he pointed at the innocent white corner of the room, and I felt sick. A wave of shame so intense it was like a physical fire washed over me, burning my face, my neck, my entire body. He had seen. He had seen everything. But as the shame swirled something else, something cold and horrifying started to bubble up underneath it. He never intended to trust me again. After that first fight on the couch, he never planned to talk it out or try to understand. He had made his decision. He judged me, found me guilty, and immediately started gathering evidence for my execution. He didn't want a partner to work things out with. He wanted a suspect to catch. He had treated our home like an interrogation room, and our life together like a crime he needed to solve. "I saw it all," he continued, his voice finally starting to crack with a cold, contained rage. "I watched you bring him into our house. I watched you bring him into our bed. Asterisk. My Times bed. I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. What could I possibly say? He had a recording of my greatest shame. He had watched me betray him not in a moment of anger, but with cold, hard, undeniable video proof. He had set a trap, and I had been too lost and too stupid to see it. I just walked right in. My betrayal was born from years of loneliness and a moment of selfish weakness. It was a messy, emotional, human mistake. His betrayal felt so much worse. It was methodical. It was calculated. It was a complete violation of the trust and privacy that a marriage is supposed to be built on. He didn't want a resolution. He wanted to win. And he had. So what now? I finally managed to ask. My voice barely a whisper. The room felt like a tomb. "Now it's over," he said, standing up. "I've already spoken to a lawyer. You'll be hearing from them." It was then, in that moment of absolute ruin, with everything broken around me, that I said the one thing that still felt true. "Let's go to counseling." He looked at me as if I'd just suggested we fly to the moon. "Are you serious? You have got to be kidding me. After what you did, there's nothing to counsel." "Yes, there is." The words tore out of me, fueled by hot, shameful tears that were finally streaming down my face. "I want you to see it, Mark. I want you to see the whole picture. I want a professional to sit in a room with us while I explain how for years I felt like a ghost in my own marriage. How I would try to talk to you and you'd just stare at your phone. How our life became a schedule of chores and silence. I am not saying what I did was right. It was horrible. And it was wrong. And I will be ashamed of it for the rest of my life. But it didn't just happen out of nowhere. It happened because I was withering on the vine. You can't leave a marriage to die of neglect and then act shocked when someone else finally notices. He just stood there, shaking his head slowly. The anger was gone, replaced by a kind of weary disgust. He wasn't listening. He didn't see me, the lonely wife crying in the wreckage of her life. He only saw the grainy figure on his secret video footage. He had his evidence. The case was closed. He turned and walked out of the bedroom without another word. He didn't slam the door. He just left, leaving me alone in the room that he had turned into a viewing theater for my failure. I know I'm the villain in his story. I get it. I broke our vows in the most fundamental way. I can't undo that, and I can't erase the pain I caused. But I also know that a marriage doesn't just shatter in one single moment. It cracks slowly over years of silence and missed connections. His story starts with the camera footage. Mine starts with the empty space on the couch next to me. He thinks the affair is what killed our marriage. I know it was already long dead. The affair was just the autopsy. I'm sure, in his version of the story, I'm the villain. The cold, cheating girlfriend who threw away 6 years for no reason. And maybe I am. Maybe there's no excuse for what I did. But the story didn't start the night he found out. It started years before, in the silence that filled our apartment. We met when we were 19. We were kids, basically. We moved in together a year later, adopted 2 dogs, and started playing house. It was fun. It was exciting. We were building a life. But somewhere along the line, the game ended and we were just there. Living in the same space, sharing the same bills, but not sharing a life anymore. The person I fell in love with, the one who couldn't keep his hands off me and would talk to me for hours about nothing, he just sort of disappeared. He was replaced by a quiet, predictable roommate who sat on the other end of the couch, scrolling on his phone. The silence was the worst part. It wasn't a comfortable, peaceful silence. It was heavy. It was the sound of everything unsaid, every problem we were ignoring. I tried to talk to him so many times. I'd say I feel like we're just roommates, or I feel really lonely even when you're right here. He'd look up from his phone, give me this tired look and say, "I know. I'm working on it." But working on it was never real effort. It was him trying to check boxes off a list. One time, after a big talk where I cried and told him I felt invisible, he scheduled a date night for the following Friday. He made a reservation and everything. But the whole dinner he was quiet. He asked about my day like he was my boss doing a performance review. There was no spark, no connection. It felt like a chore he had to complete. He'd buy me flowers after an argument, or give me a compliment that sounded like he'd read it from a script. He was putting a Band-Aid on a broken bone. He didn't see that I wasn't asking for a date night. I was asking for him. I was drowning. And he was telling me he'd get me a glass of water later. I felt so powerless in my own home. My life was this boring, stagnant routine, and I felt like a piece of the furniture. So I did something for myself. I joined a gym. It sounds cliché, I know. But I needed a place to go where my only goal was to be stronger. I needed to feel in control of something, and my own body was the only thing left. That's where I met him. My trainer. Let's call him Alex. Alex was the first person in years who actually saw me. Not Mark's girlfriend of 6 years, not the other half of a couple, just me. He noticed when I pushed myself to lift a little heavier. He'd say your form was perfect on that last set. He listened when I babbled about my stressful day at work. He'd laugh at my stupid jokes, a real genuine laugh. It was just attention. That's all it was at first, but I was starving for it. I was so desperate for someone to look at me and see a person, not an obligation. The Instagram DMs started innocently. He sent me a link to a video on workout form. I sent him a meme about leg day. It was friendly. Then it started to change. He'd ask how my weekend was. I'd tell him it was boring, just me and Mark on the couch, not talking. He'd say, "That's a waste of a fun person." No one had called me a fun person in years. Soon we were talking every day. All day. I'd be at my desk at work, smiling at my phone like an idiot. He made me feel smart and funny and beautiful. He made me feel wanted. I had completely forgotten what that felt like. The good morning texts became the best part of my day. The good night texts were the last thing I saw before I fell asleep. I knew it was wrong. Of course I did. But I built a wall around it in my head. This wasn't my real life, I told myself. My real life was the silent apartment, the 2 dogs, the roommate who used to be my boyfriend. The DMs with Alex were a fantasy world, a secret garden I could run away to when the quiet at home got too loud to bear. Then he asked for a picture. Not a gym selfie, a real picture. I sent one and he replied, "You're so beautiful." My heart did a thing it hadn't done in forever. It wasn't long before the sexting started. And the pictures. I never thought I would be that person. The girl sending nudes to a man who wasn't her boyfriend. But it was intoxicating. In that fantasy world, I was desired. I was the main character. It was a powerful feeling after years of being a background prop. I kept telling myself it didn't really count. It wasn't physical. We never met up outside the gym. We never even kissed. It was just words and pictures on a screen. It was a coping mechanism, a way to survive until things with Mark got better. I was so stupid to think they ever would. Last night was a typical Tuesday. I went to the gym after work. Alex was there, and the way he smiled at me from across the room made me feel warm all over. I came home buzzing. I'd had a good workout and exchanged a few flirty DMs with him in the car. I felt alive. I felt like myself. I walked up to our apartment door, digging for my keys. I remember thinking that the good feeling would probably disappear the second I walked inside, and saw Mark on the couch, illuminated only by the light of his phone. I was already preparing myself for the silence. I unlocked the door, pushed it open, and stepped inside. The first thing I saw wasn't him on the couch. The living room light was on, which was strange. And standing in the middle of the room next to two packed duffel bags and a cardboard box full of his things was Mark. His face was pale, and his eyes were completely empty. My heart didn't just drop, it slammed into the floor. For a second, I couldn't breathe. My fantasy world and my real life, two things I had kept so carefully separated in my mind, had just crashed into each other. "Mark," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "What are you doing?" He finally looked at me, and it was like looking at a stranger. The quiet, passive man I lived with was gone. This person's eyes were hard, like dark stones. There was no sadness in them, no confusion, just a chilling emptiness. "I know," he said. His voice was flat. "I know about him. Your trainer." The blood drained from my face. How? My mind raced, but there was only one possibility. My phone. My Instagram. He had gone through my messages. A part of me screamed about the violation of privacy, but that was drowned out by the bigger, louder reality of the bags on the floor. He picked one up. "Don't I?" Choked out, taking a step forward. "Mark, please. Don't just walk out." "What is there to talk about?" he said, not even looking at me, as he slung the duffel bag over his shoulder. "I saw the messages. I saw the pictures. All of it." He started to walk past me toward the door, and a raw panic clawed its way up my throat. I couldn't let him leave like this. Not in the middle of the night, not with this cold, hard silence between us. I grabbed his arm. "Please," I begged, and I hated how pathetic I sounded. Just Come back inside. Don't go tonight. We can talk in the morning. Please just give me a chance to explain. I need you to understand. I wasn't trying to save us. I think I knew in that moment that it was already over. But I couldn't let our 6 years end with him walking out in disgust without ever knowing the whole story. The times why, asterisk. He stopped his back to me. He stood there for a long time, and I could feel the tension in his arm. Finally, he let out a long, tired sigh and dropped the bag. He walked back into the living room and sat on the edge of the couch, staring at the floor. He didn't say a word. I went to our bedroom and shut the door. Neither of us slept. I just lay there in the dark, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, feeling the weight of him in the next room. The silence I had hated for years had transformed into something so much worse. It was active. It was suffocating. The next morning felt like a funeral. The sun was streaming in through the blinds, but the apartment felt gray and cold. I found him in the kitchen making coffee like it was any other day. The routine was so normal it made my stomach hurt. I sat down at our small kitchen table. Mark? I started, my voice shaky. He didn't turn around. Just say it. So I did. I told him everything. I admitted to the messages, the pictures. I confessed that I had kissed him once after a session at the gym. A stupid, impulsive kiss that I had immediately regretted, which was a lie, but it felt less awful than admitting the whole truth of my emotional betrayal. I apologized. I told him how sorry I was for the pain I caused him, and I meant it. My tears were real. Then I tried to make him understand. I was so lonely, I said, my voice breaking. I felt like you weren't here even when you were sitting right next to me. I tried to tell you so many times. It felt like I was screaming and you couldn't hear me. He listened. He saw me. It wasn't about him, not really. It was about feeling like a person again. I laid it all out. Faded passion, the roommate phase, the failed date nights, the feeling of being part of the furniture. I wasn't trying to excuse what I did. I was trying to explain the cracked foundation we had been living on. I wanted him to see the whole ugly, broken picture, not just the piece he found on my phone. When I finished, I was crying, just waiting for him to say something. Anything. He finally turned around, a mug of coffee in his hand. The look on his face was one I'll never forget. It was a mix of disgust and a strange, bitter pity. So that's your excuse? He said, his voice quiet but sharp. You were lonely, so instead of trying harder with me, you sent nudes to some guy at your gym. You think that makes it okay? No, it doesn't make it okay, I cried. Nothing makes it okay. But it's the reason. I'm not a monster, Mark. I was just hurting. You know what hurts, he said, stepping closer. It hurts that for the last 6 months while I was working overtime to save up for a ring because I was finally ready to stop being a stupid kid and give you what you wanted, you were sexting someone else. It hurts that every time you said you were going to the gym, you were going to see him. I didn't see you because you weren't here. You had already checked out. A ring. The word hung in the air between us, sucking all the oxygen out of the room. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. All this time, his quietness, his distance, I had seen it as him pulling away. But he was planning a future. While I was escaping into a fantasy, he was trying to build a real one. He saw the shock on my face. He just shook his head, a single humorless laugh escaping his lips. Yeah. Pathetic, right? He walked past me into the living room and picked up his bags again. This time I didn't try to stop him. There was nothing left to say. My explanation wasn't a reason, it was just an excuse for betrayal. He heard what I said, but he couldn't see past what I did. I couldn't blame him. He paused at the door. The dogs. He started, his voice thick for the first time. I'll take care of them, I said quickly. You can see them whenever you want. He nodded, not looking at me. And then he opened the door and walked out. The click of the lock was the loudest sound I've ever heard. I stood there in the middle of my apartment for I don't know how long. Then one of the dogs, our goofy golden retriever, came over and nudged my hand with his wet nose, whining softly. And I just collapsed. Now I'm surrounded by the aftermath. The apartment is too big for one person. His side of the closet is empty. His favorite mug is still sitting by the sink. I'm left with the two dogs who keep looking at the door, waiting for him to come home. And I'm left with the silence. The same silence I hated, the one I ran from. But it's different now. It's not the silence of a relationship dying. It's the silence of a relationship that's already dead. He got what he always seemed to want, peace and quiet. And I'm left with a ghost of a man I loved but couldn't reach in a life I single-handedly destroyed. I know what he wrote. I'm sure to thousands of people I'm just another cheating wife, a monster who blew up her family for a cheap thrill. And maybe I am. But his story starts on a Thursday with a pin on a map. Mine starts years earlier, in the silence of our own home. Our marriage didn't die in a hotel room. It died slowly, quietly, in between sorting laundry and paying the mortgage. We weren't a husband and wife anymore. We were co-CEOs of a messy, underfunded startup called Our Family. Our conversations were board meetings. Who's picking up the kids? Did you remember to take out the recycling? The gas bill is due. We were a team, a functional unit, but we were no longer partners. He'd sit on the couch next to me, scrolling through his phone, and I'd be scrolling through mine. And the space between us felt like a mile-wide canyon. I'd try, sometimes, really try to talk to him. About my day, about something funny I saw, about a fear I had. He'd just nod, say, uh-huh, his eyes still glued to the screen. I felt completely, utterly invisible. Then came David from work. He isn't some movie star. He's just a normal guy. But he did something my husband hadn't done in years he saw me. He'd ask how my weekend was and actually wait for the answer. He'd remember I mentioned my daughter had a cold and ask how she was feeling a few days later. He laughed at my stupid jokes. It started with emails, then chat messages. Nothing dirty or crazy, just connection. It felt like finding a glass of water in the middle of a desert. That's when my phone became my private space. Before it was a family tool, the shared calendar, the grocery list app, the group chat with the school moms. But now it was my lifeline. It was where I could be a person again, not just a function. It held conversations where someone thought I was interesting, where I could be funny and smart. So yes, I started keeping it with me at night. I'd plug it in on my nightstand instead of the kitchen counter. It felt like the only thing in the whole house that was just for me, and I guarded it like a dragon. The ups and downs he mentioned were just long, flat stretches of me feeling profoundly alone. The night before everything fell apart, it all came to a head. He came into the bedroom while I was getting ready for bed, and his face was all wrong. It was puffy and red. He just stood there for a minute before he asked, "Are you seeing someone else?" The question hung in the air, heavy and ugly. He started crying these big gulping sobs, and my first thought wasn't guilt. It was exhaustion. Here we go again. I was supposed to manage this. I was supposed to fix his feelings while mine were screaming inside my own chest. I just felt so tired. "No?" I said. And at that moment, it didn't feel like a complete lie. Was I seeing David? Not like he meant. I was having an emotional escape. How do you explain that? How do you say, "No, I'm not sleeping with another man, but I am in love with the idea of not being your household manager anymore, so I just said no"? Then I said the truest thing I'd said in months. I just need some space. He took that to mean he was being too clingy, I guess. He just nodded and left the room. But I meant space from my entire life. The next day was Thursday. I'd already told my husband I was going for drinks with my friend Sarah from work. It was a lie. I'd set up a week before a little escape hatch I built for myself. I didn't even know if I was going to use it, but I needed to know it was there. After the fight, the night before, I knew I had to. I couldn't go home. I couldn't sit on that couch and pretend everything was fine for one more night. I left work early. I told David I needed to talk, and we agreed to meet. I drove and my hands were shaking on the steering wheel. Every part of me was screaming, "Turn around, go home, be the good wife, the good mother." But another part, a part I hadn't heard from in a decade, was whispering, "Keep going, this is for you." We ended up at a hotel. It wasn't planned, not really. It just sort of happened. It wasn't about love or passion. In that sterile beige room, I wasn't mom. I wasn't wife. I wasn't the person who knew where the extra light bulbs were or when the dentist appointments were scheduled. I was just me. A woman. A person. Who could make a decision, a terrible, reckless, stupid decision all on her own. For a few hours I felt a spark. It was the girl I used to be before the marriage, before the kids, before my identity got buried under a mountain of responsibilities. It was selfish and awful and unforgivable, but it was also the only time I'd felt truly alive in years. Leaving was like waking up from a dream and stepping straight into a nightmare. The guilt hit me like a physical punch to the gut. What had I done? I had a husband and 2 beautiful kids at home. I had a life. A good life from the outside. and I'd just set a bomb under all of it. On the drive home, my mind was a hurricane. I called him, my voice shaking just a little. I told him I was on my way and asked if he wanted me to pick up some Thai food. It was a pathetic attempt at normalcy. A flimsy paper shield to hold up against the catastrophe I'd just created. He said, "Sure." I walked in the door carrying bags of pad thai and spring rolls, the smell filling the kitchen. He was in the living room watching TV. He didn't get up. He just looked over at me, his eyes tired. We ate dinner at the kitchen table, mostly in silence. It wasn't our usual empty silence. This was different. It was thick and heavy, filled with everything I couldn't say. He'd ask me how Sarah was, and I'd mumble something about her being fine. I couldn't look him in the eye. I just pushed noodles around my plate, my heart hammering against my ribs. I felt like I had a giant flashing sign over my head that said, "Liar." But he didn't press. He didn't ask questions. After we ate, we cleaned up the kitchen together, our arms brushing against each other as we put the dishes away. It was all so normal, so routine, it felt insane. We went to bed. He rolled over, and within minutes, I could hear his steady breathing as he fell asleep. I lay there in the dark for hours, staring at the ceiling, my guilt and the leftover thrill from the afternoon churning in my stomach. For a crazy second, I thought I might have gotten away with it. I thought maybe this was a secret I could just swallow and carry with me forever. Maybe tomorrow we could just wake up and keep going. I eventually fell asleep, exhausted by the emotional roller coaster. It felt like only minutes later when a light turned on, pulling me from a restless dream. He was standing by my side of the bed, not looking at me, but at my phone in his hand. The screen was lit up, casting a cold blue glow on his face. My heart didn't just drop. It stopped. The one thing that was mine, my private world, was being held like a piece of evidence. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice raspy with sleep and panic. He didn't answer. He just turned the screen towards me. It was Google Maps. My timeline. A red line snaked from my office building to a spot downtown, and then a bright red pin marking the name of the hotel. It showed I was there for almost 3 hours. It was all there. Undeniable digital proof of my betrayal. My breath caught in my throat. He finally looked at me, and his eyes weren't full of tears like the night before. They were cold. Dead. "Drinks with Sarah, huh?" he said, his voice quiet but sharp enough to cut glass. Something broke inside me. It wasn't guilt, not at first. It was a surge of white-hot rage. He had gone through my phone. He had snooped and spied and invaded the one last corner of my life I had for myself. "Why are you looking through my phone?" I snapped, sitting up, pulling the covers around me like armor. "You have no right to do that. That is my privacy." He laughed. It wasn't a real laugh. It was a short, bitter sound. "Your privacy. You went to a hotel with another man, and you're angry at me for violating your times. Privacy times." He held the phone up again, shaking it slightly. "The map doesn't lie, does it? Who is he?" The fight went out of me as quickly as it had come. The anger was just a flimsy shield, and he had shattered it. I looked at the map on the screen, at the cold, hard data of my sin, and there was nothing left to say. There were no more lies to tell. I slumped back against the pillows, the weight of what I had done finally crushing me. "I cheated," I whispered into the silent room. The words sounded ugly and cheap, like something from a bad TV show. They didn't capture the years of loneliness, the feeling of being invisible, the desperate need to feel like a person again. It was just a label, a brand. He didn't yell. He didn't scream. He just stood there for a long time looking at me as if I were a complete stranger. Then he walked out of the room, taking my phone with him. A few minutes later, I heard the creak of the living room couch, and that was it. The line had been drawn. Our marriage was now separated by a 50-foot hallway. The next morning was the most surreal experience of my life. I heard the kids get up. I heard him making them breakfast, the clatter of bowls and spoons echoing in the tense silence of the house. I finally forced myself out of bed and walked into the kitchen. He was standing at the stove, his back to me. The kids were at the table eating cereal. "Morning, Mommy," my daughter chirped. "Morning, sweetie," I said, my voice sounding fake even to my own ears. I poured myself a cup of coffee, my hand shaking. He didn't turn around. He didn't say a word. We were no longer husband and wife. We were two actors playing parents in a terrible play, trying not to let the audience know the whole set was on fire. We moved around each other in the kitchen, a careful, silent ballet of avoidance. It was 1,000 times worse than screaming. That's how it was for the next week. A deep, freezing cold settled over our house. We spoke only when we had to about the kids or a bill that needed to be paid. Our conversations were short, functional, and completely dead. He slept on the couch every night. I'd lie awake in our big empty bed, listening to him toss and turn, the sound of his unhappiness a constant torment. I'd see my phone charging on the kitchen counter again, back in its old spot. But now it felt like a bomb. He'd put it there, a symbol that there were no more secrets. Nothing was mine anymore. I know he thinks I did it for David, that I threw our family away for some guy from the office. But he's wrong. David was a symptom, not the disease. I destroyed our family for a feeling. I did it for a few hours, of feeling seen, of feeling like the main character in my own life, instead of a supporting role in everyone else's. It was a selfish, desperate, and catastrophic act of self-destruction. I chose a temporary escape over a permanent home. He started talking to a lawyer. I see the emails on the computer screen when I walk by. He's making plans for a life without me in it. And I can't even blame him. I'm the villain of this story. I know that. But what I don't think he'll ever understand, what he could never see from his side of the canyon between us, is that I had felt like a ghost in our marriage for years. And on that Thursday, I chose to become a monster instead, just so I could feel real again. I know what you've heard. I know what he's told everyone. He painted this perfect picture of a devoted husband and the crazy, cheating wife who blew up their lives for no reason. I'm the villain of his story, and maybe I am. But villains have their reasons, don't they? And you've only heard his side. Our marriage wasn't a marriage. It was a business arrangement where he was the CEO and I was the pretty receptionist he kept around to make the office look good. He worked all the time, which I understood. But when he came home, he didn't come home to me. He came home to his house, his couch, his TV. I was just another one of his possessions. He'd sit there exhausted and talk about the life he's accustomed me to, like he'd bought me on layaway and was still making payments. He thought providing was the same as loving. We never talked. Not really. I'd ask about his day and he'd give me one-word answers. I'd try to tell him about mine, and I could see his eyes glaze over. The silence in that big, beautiful house was the loudest thing I've ever heard. It was crushing. I was 25 years old, and I felt like my life was already over. I was just a ghost floating through the rooms he paid for. The only time I ever felt like a real person was at his soccer games. Every single weekend I was there. He thought I went for him to be the supportive wife. He probably told you I was just there for the free-flowing booze the team always had. The truth is, I went because it was the only time I was around other people. While he was on the field being the hero, I was on the sidelines finally talking to adults. His teammates, their wives, their friends, they were like his work family, and for a couple of hours a week, I got to pretend they were my family too. They didn't see me as just his wife. They saw times me asterisk. Buddy especially, and a few of the other guys, they'd actually ask how I was doing. They'd remember I was trying to get into a design course, or that I was worried about my mom. They'd laugh at my stupid jokes. It felt so good to just laugh. The drinks didn't make me loose or wild. They just gave me the courage to open my mouth after a week of being ignored. For the first time in years, I felt like someone could see me. I wasn't invisible anymore. That night, everything came to a head. It was the last game of the season. We won. Everyone was celebrating. He came over sweaty and tired and said, "Let's go home. I just want to be with you." I knew exactly what that meant. It meant we'd go home, he'd turn on the TV, and be asleep on the couch in 20 minutes while I sat there alone in the quiet. The same thing every time. It was an order, not an invitation. Then Buddy and some of the others came over buzzing from the wind. "We're all going back to my place for a party. You guys have to come." It felt like a lifeline. A real party with music and people and laughter. A chance to feel like I was still young and alive, not just some sad, bored housewife. I looked at my husband, my eyes pleading. "Can we go just for a little while?" "No," he said, not even looking at me. "I'm tired. We're going home." It wasn't a discussion. It was a command. He was locking my cage for the night. Right there. In front of everyone, he made me feel like a child being told it was past my bedtime. The humiliation was hot on my face. He walked toward the car, expecting me to follow like I always did. I just stood there. I saw Buddy's car full of people who were laughing and alive. It felt like a choice. I could get in my husband's car and go back to the silent, empty house. Or I could get in Buddy's and go feel like a person for a few more hours. Stay in the quiet cage, or fly. So, I flew. I chose the messy, reckless, stupid freedom over the clean, orderly despair. He beeped the horn, and I just turned and walked away. What happened at that party? It wasn't planned. It wasn't about love or even lust. It was about contact. It was a chaotic mess of bad decisions, too much to drink, and years of feeling so desperately alone. It was about being the center of attention, even for a few minutes. First with Buddy, then with another teammate. It was wrong and ugly, and a part of me knew it even then. But it was also the first time in so long that I felt wanted. Not provided for, not owned, but actually times wanted, asterisk. It was a scream. A loud, terrible, desperate scream into the void of my life. And for one night I felt like someone finally heard me. I stumbled home in the early morning, my head spinning with a sick mix of guilt and adrenaline. The sun was just coming up. I unlocked the front door as quietly as I could, my heart pounding in my chest. I just wanted to crawl into bed and pretend the whole night was a bad dream. But he was awake. He was sitting on the living room couch in the dark, facing the door. He wasn't watching TV. He wasn't reading. He was just sitting there, perfectly still. My blood went cold. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I saw he was holding something in his lap. An old iPad. The one I used to use before he bought me a new one, the one that was probably still logged into all my accounts. He slowly lifted his head, and his face was a mask I'd never seen before. It wasn't sad. It wasn't hurt. It was cold. As cold as ice. And in that one terrifying second, I knew. He knew everything. "What is that?" I whispered. But I already knew. The words felt like sand in my mouth. He didn't answer. He just held up the iPad, angling the screen so I could see it. My messages. All of them. The ones to my friend talking about how lonely I was. The ones to Buddy making the plans. The ones from later that night, graphic and stupid, that I barely even remembered sending. It was all there. A complete record of my betrayal. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't crying. That would have been easier to handle. Instead, he just looked at me with this dead, empty expression. Like a CEO looking at a spreadsheet that showed a catastrophic loss. An asset had malfunctioned. "Is this you?" he asked. His voice perfectly level. I couldn't speak, so I just nodded. The shame was a physical weight pushing me down. My first thought wasn't about love, or our marriage, or his heart. It was pure animal panic. My whole life was tied to this man. My home, my money, my future. He was everything. "Are you leaving me?" I finally choked out. It was the only question I could think to ask. He almost laughed a short, ugly sound. "You left months ago. You just didn't tell me. Pack a bag." And that was it. He stood up, walked into the bedroom, and came back a few minutes later with one of my overnight bags. He had already packed it. A change of clothes, my toothbrush, my phone charger. It was so efficient, so cold. He was terminating an employee, not ending a marriage. He opened the front door and put the bag on the porch. Go. The next few weeks were a blur of crashing on a friend's couch and crying until I couldn't breathe. Then he called. I expected more anger, more accusations, but his voice was different. It was sad. He said he'd been thinking. He said maybe this was a wake-up call for both of us. He said he still loved me and that maybe, just maybe, we could find a way back. He mentioned therapy. He talked about starting fresh and dating each other again once we'd had some time apart. He gave me hope. And God, I was so desperate for it that I grabbed it with both hands. I thought, times, this is it. He sees it now. He sees how broken we were. We can fix this. Asterisk. I clung to that hope like a fool. He said we needed to separate legally to make things clean while we healed. He had the papers drawn up. He walked me through them calm and reasonable. This is just to protect us both while we're living apart, he said. It's just temporary. When we got to the part about spousal support, he looked me right in the eye. I think we should both waive this, he said gently. I don't want money to complicate our healing. Let's make this about us, not about finances. I agreed to everything. I signed every single paper he put in front of me. I thought I was showing him I was serious about fixing times, us asterisk. I thought I was proving that I wasn't just with him for the life he'd accustomed me to. I moved my things into a storage unit and found a tiny apartment dismantling my own life, piece by piece, because I truly believed it was a step toward rebuilding our future. All the while, he was watching me. I didn't realize until later that my iCloud was still logged in on that old iPad. He saw every message. He knew I was still talking to Buddy. It's not an excuse, but I was so alone, and Buddy was the only person from my old life who was still kind to me. It wasn't a grand love affair. It was a pathetic, lonely crutch. My husband saw it all, and he said nothing. He let me keep digging my own grave, all while telling me he was on the other side with a ladder waiting to help me out. The day the divorce was finalized, he called me. The gentle, sad voice was gone. The cold CEO was back. It's done, he said. I hope you and Buddy are very happy together with absolutely nothing from me. You made your choice. Now you get to live with it. The bottom dropped out of my stomach. What are you talking about? I thought. I thought we were going to try. He actually laughed. Try? Why would I ever try with you? I just wanted to make sure you walked away with exactly what you deserved, nothing. This was never about reconciliation. This was about winning. I wanted everyone to see who you really are, and I wanted to make sure you paid for it. And then I saw it all. The fake therapy talks. The hope he dangled in front of me. The divorce papers. It was a master plan. He hadn't been heartbroken. He'd been building a case. He played me, he played my family, who begged me to work it out with him. He even played the therapist, he suggested. He didn't just want to divorce me. He wanted to destroy me. He wanted to leave me with nothing and walk away looking like the perfect, blameless victim. And he did. I was left with a broken heart, an empty bank account, and the reputation he'd carefully built for me. I hit rock bottom. For a while, the only person I had was Buddy, but that crumbled pretty quickly once the drama faded and real life set in. It was months later, when I was at my lowest, that I met someone online. Just a random guy I started talking to. He wasn't a hero or a savior. He was just a nice man from Tennessee who listened. He heard my story, the whole ugly, messy truth of it, and he didn't run away. For the first time, I felt like someone saw all of me, the good and the bad, and decided I was still worth talking to. So I moved. I packed up the little I had left and started over. My new husband and I, our life here, this isn't some trophy I won. It's not a happy ending I rode off into. It's what you build after your entire world burns to the ground. It's what I have left after surviving a fire. And my ex-husband, he's the one who lit the match. I know how my ex-husband tells this story. I'm the monster who ripped our marriage apart in a single afternoon back in 2010. I'm the villain, the cheater, the crazy ex who couldn't let go. And some of that is true. I did a terrible thing. But his story always starts in the bedroom. Mine starts in the silence that filled every room of our house for a year before that. When we got married, I thought we had it all figured out. We were going to build a life. He was smart, funny, and he looked at me like I was the only person in the world. Then he decided to become an EMT. I was so proud of him. I supported him completely. I didn't realize that in signing up to save lives, he was signing off on ours. The training didn't just change his schedule. It changed him. He came home smelling of antiseptic and exhaustion. His eyes holding scenes I couldn't imagine. Our life together became a supporting role in his heroic journey. Dinner wasn't about our day anymore. It was a debriefing of his. He'd talk about trauma protocols, intubation techniques, and the right way to apply a tourniquet. He'd be staring right at me, but his eyes would be 1,000 yards away, replaying some horrific simulation in his head. I'd try to tell him about my day at work, and I could see him just waiting for me to finish so he could get back to what was really important. I stopped trying. What was my little drama at the office compared to him learning how to restart a human heart? My loneliness felt so small, so petty. I felt guilty for even feeling it. I was the wife of a future first responder. My job was to be the stable foundation, the quiet home he could return to after a day of chaos. So I tried. I really did. I kept the house clean. I made his favorite meals. I'd sit on the couch and pretend to be interested in his textbooks. I became a ghost in my own home, a piece of furniture that was just there. The worst part was the bed. That space which used to be ours became just another place for him to collapse. I'd reach for him wanting to feel his touch, and he'd flinch or mumble something about being tired. It wasn't rejection, not really. It was absence. He was a body next to me, but he was gone. I felt like I was sleeping next to a stranger who wore my husband's face. My job was planning careers for Marines transitioning out of the service. I'd sit across from these tough guys, these diesel jarheads as my husband called them, and help them map out a new life. The irony was a constant bitter taste in my mouth. I was an expert at building a future for everyone but myself. That's how I met him. He was one of those Marines. He walked into my office all charm and bravado, but I could see the fear in his eyes. He had no idea what to do next. For the first time, my work felt personal. I saw a man who was lost just like me. We started with his resume. Then it turned into coffee to talk about job interviews. Then lunches where we talked about everything else. He asked me about my day and actually listened to the answer. He laughed at my stupid jokes. He looked at me. He really looked at me. And I felt like I was snapping back into focus after being a blurry background character for so long. It wasn't a plan. I wasn't hunting for an affair. I was just a person dying of thirst. And he was the first one to offer me a glass of water. The emotional connection came first, a lifeline in the empty ocean of my marriage. I held on for dear life. The day it all fell apart was supposed to be like any other. It was my husband's day off, but he'd told me he was picking up an extra skills lab all day at the training center. That was our life. A carefully managed schedule of absences. The house was quiet. It was always quiet. But that day, the silence felt heavier, like it was physically pressing down on me. I felt like if I screamed, no sound would come out. I was lonely. A deep, aching kind of lonely that settles in your bones. So I called him. The Marine. I knew it was stupid. I knew it was a line that once crossed could never be uncrossed. But I just couldn't stand the quiet anymore. I needed to hear a voice. I needed to feel like I existed. He came over. We sat on the couch and talked, and it felt so normal, so easy. He made me laugh, a real deep laugh that I hadn't felt in months. He touched my arm, and it was like a jolt of electricity. It wasn't about sex. It was about being seen, being wanted. One thing led to another, and soon we were in the bedroom. My husband's and my bedroom. In that moment, it didn't feel like a betrayal. It felt like a reclamation. I was taking a space defined by loneliness and filling it with life, with touch, with feeling. For a few minutes, I wasn't an EMT's wife. I was just a woman. In the middle of it all, with the afternoon sun slanting through the blinds, I felt a sudden chill. The air in the room changed. It wasn't a sound, not at first. It was a stillness. A heavy, absolute silence that cut through everything. I opened my eyes and looked toward the doorway. And there he was. My husband. Just standing there. He wasn't supposed to be here. His face was a blank mask. No shock, no rage, not even sadness. Just nothing. It was the same look he gave me across the dinner table, the look that said, I wasn't really there. The world stopped. The air turned thick and heavy, and the only sound was the panicked rustle of sheets and clothes as the Marine scrambled off the bed. He looked like a cornered animal. all that smooth charm from an hour ago completely gone. My husband didn't move. He just watched the guy fumble with his jeans, his expression unreadable. For a second, I thought he was going to explode. I braced myself for the yelling, for the violence, for something. Anything would have been better than the silence, but he just stood there, this ghost in his own house, watching another man get dressed in his bedroom. The Marine finally got his pants on and grabbed his shirt, muttering apologies that died in the suffocating quiet. He made a move for the door, and I watched frozen as my husband did the most devastating thing imaginable. He didn't block the way. He didn't say a word. He just took one small step to the side. He held the door open for him. An invitation. He let the man who had just blown our world apart walk right out. As the Marine scurried past, he had the nerve to say, "It is what it is," like he was talking about bad traffic. Then he was gone. The door clicked shut, leaving just the two of us. The nothing on my husband's face finally cracked, replaced by a look of such profound disappointment it felt like a physical blow. All the guilt and shame and horror that had been churning inside me erupted, but it came out as anger. It was all I had left. I looked at the stranger, the man whose absence had driven me to this, and the ugliest, truest words spilled out of my mouth. "You weren't supposed to be here." I saw the flicker of pain in his eyes. He finally saw me. He finally heard me. He nodded slowly, a single final gesture. "You're right," he said, his voice flat and dead. "Consider this my last unscheduled visit. Every day is your day off, from here on out." And then he turned and walked away. I heard the front door open and close. He was gone too. The silence that came back was a different kind. It wasn't empty anymore. It was full of what I had done. The next few weeks were a special kind of hell. He filed for divorce so fast my head spun. He wouldn't take my calls, wouldn't answer my texts. He communicated only through his lawyer. He had erased me. I was desperate. I wasn't just trying to save our marriage. I was trying to make him understand times why, asterisk. I needed him to see the year of loneliness that led to that one afternoon. I needed him to know that he had left long before I ever strayed. I got it in my head that if I could just see him, if I could just talk to him face to face, I could make him listen. I found out where he was taking his nursing classes. He'd switched from EMT to nursing for a more stable career path. Another decision made without me. I drove to the campus. I know now it was a crazy thing to do. There was a restraining order by then, a piece of paper that legally made me a ghost to him. But I wasn't thinking straight. I just wanted to see his face. I waited for him outside his classroom, and when he walked out, he looked at me like I was something he'd scraped off his shoe. He didn't even break his stride. He just pulled out his phone and called the campus police. That was it. I wasn't just the cheater anymore. I was the crazy, obsessed ex. The Marine was no better. The man I thought was my lifeline, my connection, he vanished. ghosted me completely. When I wouldn't stop calling, demanding he at least talk to me, he accused me of harassing him. Me harassing him. He was a willing participant until the second my husband appeared in that doorway. I was so broken and furious, I did the only thing I could think of. I sued him for emotional distress. It was a messy, pathetic public spectacle. I was trying to make anyone pay for the pain I was in. Of course, it went nowhere. It just made me look even more unhinged. I lost him just like I lost my husband. I was completely, utterly alone in a disaster of my own making. I see his life now on social media. My friends, our old friends, still have him on their pages. He finished nursing school. He married one of the nurses from his program, a pretty woman with a kind smile. They have a little girl now. He posts pictures of them at the park on vacation, of him holding his daughter on his shoulders. He looks happy. Truly happy. He got everything he wanted. A noble career, a wife who understands it, a family. His story ends with him as the stoic victim who overcame betrayal to find true love. He's the hero. And I'm the villain, the cautionary tale he tells his new wife about how crazy exes can be. But they never tell the first part of the story. They never talk about the years of being a widow to a man who was still alive. They don't talk about the soul-crushing loneliness of sitting in a silent house waiting for someone to see you. I'm not saying what I did was right. It was a horrible, destructive mistake that I will regret for the rest of my life. I own that. But my story doesn't start with another man in my bed. It starts with an empty space beside me, in it a space so cold and vast that I would have done anything to feel warm again, even for a minute. He thinks I'm a monster who ate his heart. The truth is, I was just a woman starving in my own home, and I ate the poison because someone, for the first time in a very long time, told me it was bread. I know my husband probably told you his side of the story. I'm the monster. The cheating wife who threw away a good man and a good life for a fling with some young guy. It's an easy story to tell, and an even easier one to believe. But it's not the whole story. It's not even close. Our life, the one he was so proud of, felt like a cage to me. It was a nice cage, I'll give him that. It had a mortgage, a joint bank account, and health insurance. It had predictable weekends and a 5-year plan. But every single bar of that cage was built from his dreams, not mine. For years I told him what I wanted. I didn't want to be tied down. I wanted to travel, to live somewhere else, to see something beyond the town we grew up in. He'd listen, nod, and say, "Of course, honey." Eventually. Eventually was his favorite word. It was the promise he used to keep me quiet, to keep me in the cage while he tended to his stable life. The master's degree was my escape hatch. It was the one dream of mine that he couldn't say eventually to because it had a start date. Moving to the U.S. was supposed to be our adventure, the first step towards the life I always talked about. But as the date got closer, he started finding excuses. His job was too important. The mortgage, the stability. He framed it as a mutual decision for him to stay behind while I went. He said it was the responsible thing to do. What I heard was, "The house is more important than being with you." So I left. I moved to a new country alone, and for the first time in almost a decade, I could finally breathe. He was back home taking care of the very things I had just escaped from. Life in the U.S. was a shock, but in a good way. I wasn't just a wife anymore. I was a student. I was a person with my own schedule, my own friends, my own life. It was thrilling and scary. Then my new roommate arrived. He was 22 from Spain, and he had this energy I'd almost forgotten existed. He wasn't just handsome, that's the easy part to focus on. It was that he saw life as something to be lived, not planned. He'd backpacked through Asia, worked in 3 different countries, and talked about the future like it was a wide-open map, not a checklist. When he looked at me, he didn't see someone's wife. He saw me. A woman, a student, a traveler, someone interesting. We'd stay up late talking not about bills or whose turn it was to take out the trash, but about art and politics and what it felt like to be completely free. The connection was instant, and it terrified me. It felt like coming home to a person I'd never met. I tried to do the right thing. I really did. I knew this connection was more than just a friendship, and I felt like I had to be honest. I called my husband. My hands were shaking. I tried to explain how I was changing, how this new life was opening me up. And then I asked him about an open relationship. It was clumsy, I know, but it was a desperate attempt to include him in my new reality. I was practically begging him, "Please, can you see this new person I'm becoming and love her too?" His answer was immediate. "No! Not! Let's talk about it! Not! What are you feeling? Just a flat, hard no!" It was like a door slamming shut. He didn't want to understand. He just wanted the old me, the predictable wife, to finish her school project and come home so he could put her back in her box. I tried one more time a few weeks later. It turned into a huge fight. He accused me of trying to destroy everything he'd worked for. He kept talking about our house, our future, our stability. He saw my request as a threat to his life plan. I saw his refusal as a total rejection of me, of my feelings, my growth, my entire being. He didn't want me. He wanted the idea of me he was comfortable with. After that second, know something inside me just broke. Sleeping with my roommate wasn't a decision I made to hurt my husband. It felt like a decision I made to save myself. For the first time, I felt seen. I felt desired not as part of a package deal, but for who I was in that moment. It was passionate and real, and it made me feel alive in a way I hadn't in years. I knew it was wrong in the context of my marriage, but it felt like the most honest thing I had done in a long time. Then came Valentine's Day. He had booked a ticket for me to come visit him months before. Going back felt like putting on an old costume that didn't fit anymore. The whole trip was a mistake. I was drowning in a mix of guilt for what I was doing back in the U.S. and a deep simmering anger for why I felt I had to do it. I couldn't pretend to be the happy wife he wanted. I was distant, constantly on my phone. It was my only link back to the world where I felt like my real self. My roommate and I were texting constantly. It was stupid and reckless, I know. He kept trying to be romantic, planning dinners and talking about our future, about me coming home for good. Each word felt like another brick being placed on my chest. He kept saying how much he missed me, how he was just holding down the fort until I came back. He had no idea I had already built a new life without him. On our last night there, we were just sitting on the couch, watching a movie. The air was thick with everything I wasn't saying. I got up to get a glass of water, leaving my phone on the coffee table. I walked back into the living room and my blood ran cold. He was standing there, not watching the TV, but just looking down at the table. He reached out and picked up my phone. The screen lit up. My heart completely stopped. I saw the message preview before he did. A string of little heart emojis from my roommate. My stomach dropped through the floor. It felt like the world went silent. For a second, like in a movie right before the explosion. He didn't have to unlock it. He didn't even have to read the words. He just saw the name and the hearts, and his entire body went stiff. He looked up from the screen and his face was a mask of cold fury I had never seen before. "Who is this?" he asked. His voice was quiet, dangerously quiet. That was so much scarier than yelling. I could have lied. I could have made something up. But I was so tired. So tired of pretending, of living two different lives. The truth felt less exhausting than another lie. "It's my roommate," I said, my own voice barely a whisper. That's when the quiet broke. He threw the phone onto the couch cushion like it was on fire. "Your roommate, your 22-year-old roommate from Spain, he wasn't asking. He was accusing." The dam of his composure shattered and everything came rushing out. "How could you do this? In our home, while you're here, to see times me, times for Valentine's Day." All the air left my lungs and something inside me snapped. The guilt I'd been carrying for weeks was suddenly replaced by a hot, burning anger. You want to know how? Because I was suffocating. For years. The words just started pouring out of me. A flood of everything I had swallowed down for a decade. I told you I was unhappy. I told you I felt trapped. What did you do? You told me eventually. You promised me someday. Your someday was never going to come. That's an excuse. He yelled back, his face red. You cheated on me, and now you're trying to blame me for it. I'm not blaming you. I'm telling you the reason I was crying now, hot, angry tears. I begged you to listen to me. I called you twice and asked you, begged you to just try and understand that I was changing. I asked about an open relationship because I was trying to be honest with you. I was trying to find a way for us to survive this. A way for you to accept the person I was becoming. And what did you say? No. You just shut me down. You didn't ask why. You didn't care how I was feeling. You just cared that I was threatening your perfect, stable little life. The fight went on for hours. It was ugly. I told him our sex life had felt like a chore for years, something to be checked off a list. I told him I felt more like his property than his partner. He heard every word as a justification for sleeping with someone else. He couldn't see that the affair wasn't the disease. It was the symptom. It was the final desperate act of a woman who had tried everything else to feel alive. Eventually, we ran out of things to scream. We were just two exhausted, broken people sitting in the living room of a house that no longer felt like a home to either of us. I slept on the couch, but I didn't really sleep. I just stared at the ceiling, feeling hollowed out. The next morning was my flight back to the U.S. The silence in the car on the way to the airport was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. It was filled with everything we had screamed at each other and everything we hadn't said for years. When he dropped me at the curb, he finally turned to me. His eyes were red. "I get it now," he said, his voice raw. "I see how I pushed you to this point. I can change. I can be a better person. We can fix this." I looked at him, and for the first time I felt nothing but a deep, overwhelming sadness. He still didn't understand. He thought this was something a few personal changes could fix, like patching a hole in a wall. He didn't realize the whole foundation of our life together was built on a lie. The lie that I was happy being the person he wanted me to be. "Okay," I said, because it was easier than starting the fight all over again. I got out of the car and I didn't look back. Flying back to my apartment, I felt a strange sense of peace mixed with the pain. It was the peace of a decision finally being made, even if it was the most destructive one of my life. Walking back into my apartment, back to my life, felt right. My roommate was there. He didn't ask questions. He just saw the look on my face, gave me a hug, and made me tea. In that simple moment, I felt more understood than I had in 10 years of marriage. My husband and I still talk on the phone. The calls are painful. He tells me he's in therapy. He says he's working on himself, that he's learning to listen. He keeps saying he realizes he was the problem, that he pushed me away. He thinks that if he just says the right words, if he just changes enough, I'll come back home and we can pretend none of this ever happened. But he doesn't get it. He can't. He thinks he just needs to be a better husband. He doesn't understand that I need to be a different woman. I do love him. Or I love the boy I met when I was 19 and the man I spent a third of my life with. I love the memory of who we were. But I can't go back to being that person. I'm not her anymore. He fell in love with a woman I'm no longer willing to be, a woman who doesn't even exist anymore. And nothing he can do will ever bring her back. I'm his wife, the one who cheated. I know what he's probably told everyone, what story he's built, where he's the victim and I'm the villain who threw our family away for a one-night stand. He's not wrong about what I did. I own that. But he's wrong about why. He's leaving out the 10 years that came before that one night. He's leaving out the part where I felt like a ghost in my own life. We've been together for a decade, married for less than a year. We have 2 beautiful kids, a 6-year-old and a 2-year-old. From the outside, we look like we have it all. He probably even told you we had this cool modern relationship. An open one. That was his word for it. It sounds so progressive, so trusting. It was a lie. Our relationship was open, but only in one direction. It was open as long as he was holding the door. The threesomes were always his idea, his fantasy. I was supposed to be the cool wife who was down for anything. And for a long time I tried to be. I really did. It felt exciting at first. But after a while I realized it wasn't about me or my pleasure. It was about him watching. I was a performer in his private show. Then came the next rule. I was allowed to be with other men, but only if he was there. Watching, participating, directing. It wasn't my freedom. It was his kink. He got to have the thrill of sharing his wife without any of the risk. I was still his. And God, he never let me forget it. For all his talk about being open and trusting, he never actually trusted me. He'd check my phone. He didn't even hide it all the time. He'd just pick it up when I was in the shower and scroll through my messages. We fought about it constantly. He'd apologize, say he was insecure and he was working on it, but a week later I'd see that familiar look on his face, that flicker of suspicion, and I'd know he'd been through my phone again. It felt like I was on parole. Like I had to constantly prove my loyalty to a man who was asking me to perform with others for his entertainment. The contradiction was insane, and it was suffocating me. I loved him. I loved our kids, but I was disappearing. I was just a collection of roles: mother, performer, wife. I wasn't a person anymore. A few months ago, I planned a trip to go back to my hometown for a weekend. Just me, our oldest daughter, and my best friend. It felt like coming up for air. I didn't have to be the cool wife for 48 hours. I could just be me. My friend was going through a nasty divorce. Watching her, listening to her talk about how her husband made her feel small and invisible was terrifying. It was like looking into a funhouse mirror and seeing a twisted, exaggerated version of my own future. I didn't want that. I didn't want to wake up in another 10 years completely hollowed out. That night, after my daughter was asleep at my mom's house, my friend and I went out. We just wanted to feel normal, to drink a little too much and laugh about stupid things. We ended up at a bar with a hot tub and met a group of guys. They were funny and normal and didn't know a thing about my life. One of them in particular kept looking at me. Not in a creepy way, just a direct way. He was looking at times me asterisk. Not at my husband, not at my kids who weren't there. He was just a guy looking at a woman, and for the first time in years, that's all I felt like. A woman. I know how it sounds. It's a cliche. But in that moment, all the resentment and frustration from years of being managed and watched just boiled over. Sleeping with him wasn't a plan. It wasn't about him at all, really. It was a stupid, reckless, selfish impulse. It was one single thing, one decision that was completely and totally mine. No rules, no audience, no one watching. It was a rebellion. A messy, ugly 5-minute rebellion in a cheap hotel room. The second it was over, the shame crashed down on me. It was instant and overwhelming. What had I done? I thought about my kids, about my husband, about the life I had just set on fire. The next morning, I sent the guy a text. I just asked him to be discreet, to not say anything. It wasn't because I wanted to see him again. God, no. It was a panicked attempt to put the lid back on the box. I just wanted to erase it. To go home and pretend it never happened, that I hadn't been so stupid. For a month it actually worked. I pushed it down. I came home and slipped back into my role. I played the part of the happy wife and mother, but the guilt was always there. A low hum under my skin. I was jumpy, anxious. Every time my husband picked up my phone, my heart would stop. Then, last weekend, we went out for a drink at a local bar. We were sitting at a table trying to have a normal date night when I saw him. One of the guys from that night, not the one I slept with, but his friend. My blood went ice cold. He walked past our table, glanced at me, and gave a tiny, almost unnoticeable nod. But I saw it. And I felt my husband's eyes snap to me. He saw it too. He saw the flicker of panic on my face before I could hide it. The rest of the night was thick with a tension you could cut with a knife. He didn't say anything. He just watched me. That old familiar look of suspicion was back, but it was 100 times worse. I knew what was coming. I knew as soon as we got home and the kids were in bed, he was going to go for my phone. The car ride home was completely silent. It was the loudest silence I've ever heard in my life. I just stared out the passenger window, watching the streetlights blur past, feeling sick to my stomach. He didn't have to say a word. I knew I was walking into the end of my world. As soon as the car door shut in the garage, the silence was broken, but the quiet that filled the house was even worse. He walked ahead of me, his back rigid. We did the routine on autopilot, checked on the kids, locked the doors, turned off the lights. Every normal, everyday action felt like a lie. I went into our bedroom and changed into my pajamas, my hands shaking so badly I could barely pull my t-shirt over my head. I got into bed and faced the wall, pretending to be asleep, my heart hammering against my ribs. I knew he wouldn't be able to resist. It was like a drug for him. The suspicion, the need to check, to confirm his worst fears. I laid there for what felt like an eternity, listening to his movements in the bathroom. The water running, the toilet flushing. Then, silence. I knew he was standing in the doorway watching me, waiting to see if I was really asleep. I kept my breathing slow and even. Finally, I heard the faint rustle of my purse on the dresser. Then the soft footsteps as he walked into the living room, trying to give himself some distance so I wouldn't hear. He thought he was being so quiet. I didn't cry. I didn't get up and scream at him. Honestly, the first thing I felt was this wave of complete and utter exhaustion. Here we were again. He was breaking his promise to stop snooping, and I had given him the ultimate reason to do it. The sickest part was that a tiny piece of me was almost relieved. The hiding was over. The bomb that had been ticking under our floorboards for a month was about to go off. It was probably only 10 minutes, but it felt like hours. I heard him come back into the room. I didn't turn around. I just felt the mattress dip as he sat on the edge of the bed behind me. He didn't say anything for a long time. I could feel his anger radiating off him. It was cold, not hot. "Who is he?" he finally whispered. His voice was raw, broken. I rolled over slowly. The screen of my phone was lit up in his hand, my texts open for him to see. The one I'd sent the morning after. "Hey, was fun last night. Just asking you, be discreet about it." That was it. That was all the proof he needed. "You read my messages," I said. It wasn't an accusation. It was just a flat statement. A fact. "Of course I read your messages," he hissed, his voice trembling with rage. "You think I wouldn't?" After that, look at the bar. Who the hell is he, and why is he telling you it'll be our little secret? And that was it. The dam broke. I told him everything. I started with the trip and ended with the text message. I didn't leave anything out. When I was done, I tried to tell him why. I tried to explain the 10 years of feeling like a prop in his fantasies. The constant paranoia. The way his openness was just another form of control. He just stared at me, his face pale. He wasn't hearing any of it. All he could see was the betrayal. A performance he finally choked out. "You think our life has been a performance? I gave you everything. We have kids, a house. I thought you were happy. I let you. I trusted you." The word trusted hung in the air between us, so completely dishonest, it almost made me laugh. "You trusted me. You've been going through my phone for years." Trust was never on the table. You wanted control. And for one night, I just wanted to feel like I wasn't being controlled. It was the wrong thing to say. I knew it as soon as the words left my mouth. His face hardened. "So you fucked some random guy. For freedom." He spat the word out like it was poison. The fight lasted for hours. We screamed, we cried. He punched a hole in the bedroom door. I just sat on the bed and took it. By the time the sun started to creep through the blinds, we were both empty. He slept on the couch. The next few weeks were a special kind of hell. We lived like roommates who hated each other, communicating only through text messages about the kids. The air in our house was so thick with unspoken anger and hurt, I felt like I couldn't breathe. I was just waiting for him to tell me to pack my bags and leave. I destroyed our family. I deserved it. Then one evening, about 2 weeks later, he came home from work and told me to sit down. My stomach dropped. This was it. He looked tired, defeated. "I've been thinking," he said, not looking at me, "about everything. About the kids." He took a deep breath. "I've decided I want to stay. I want to try and fix this." I should have felt relief. I should have been grateful. But I wasn't. Hearing him say that he had decided my fate felt exactly like everything that had come before. It wasn't a discussion. It wasn't us choosing to fix this together. It was him, the king, granting me a pardon. It wasn't forgiveness. It was a life sentence. Okay, I said, my voice barely a whisper. But things have to change, he continued, and now he looked right at me, his eyes cold. There are going to be new rules. You have to earn my trust back. It's going to take a long, long time. If you want this to work, you will do whatever it takes. And there it was. The trust he never really gave me in the first place was now something I had to work for, maybe for the rest of my life. He would have unlimited access to my phone, my emails, my location. I couldn't go out with my friends without him knowing every detail. The invisible cage I'd been living in for years was gone, replaced by a real one with steel bars. I had no right to complain anymore. I had given up that right. So that's where we are now. We're working on it. He tells people we're trying to save our marriage, but it doesn't feel like we're building anything. It feels like I'm serving a sentence. I shattered our life. I know I did. I own every piece of that. But I did it because I was suffocating. I lit a match to get some air and I burned the whole house down. Now I'm trapped in the wreckage with the man who built it. And he's telling me I'm lucky he's willing to stay. Maybe I am. Or maybe I just traded one kind of prison for another.